Welcome everyone. Glad to see you on my channel. Today I will tell you about an unusual story, an amazing story about companionship and love. I wish you a pleasant audience.
When I get rich, I'll become a cool banker and invite you all to the restaurant. Steve, an excellent student, the soul of the company and a shirt guy, told his classmates. What's the occasion? Oliver, the math teacher who had entered the room, grinned wickedly. I don't care what the occasion is, smiled Steve. The main thing is to become a banker. That's true, nodded the teacher and looking at him slyly added. But I hope you remember what subject a future banker means to know. That's right, Oliver. Steve said, for me personally, your subject is sacred. I believe that mathematics is deservedly considered the queen of sciences. Well, that's good to hear, smiled the mathematician, writing equations on the board. It's just a pity that not everyone understands it. Harry obviously disagrees with you. No, I agree, Harry said hastily, fearing that he would not be called to the blackboard. That's good, Oliver smiled even wider. Then please come to the board. We need to get these two equations straightened out. Harry stood up slowly and walked doggedly to the blackboard. The classmates, like Oliver, knew how it was going to end. To do away with equations? No, this was not Harry's student. This call to the board was no different from the previous ones. So how are we doing? Oliver turned to the board. Harry was standing there with a dejected expression on his face, crumpling his chalk in his hands. What's the problem? The teacher asked curtly. Harry, have you not been studying again? No, I did. Really, I did. The student rounded his eyes. It's just that I can't solve something. I can't get it right. What are you talking about? Oliver grinned. Sit down, my grief. Okay, we're going to go to the board, Steve. Steve went to the board and solved both equations in 5 minutes. There you go, Oliver said approvingly. Knowledge is power. And you, Harry, study the material more carefully next time, or you won't be able to solve it again. How do you see your future? That's different, Steve. He'll go far. He'll be a banker if he stays on the right path. And you, Harry, you'll be a factory nut at best. It's been a long time since then. By the way, Oliver was only half right. Steve really became a great banker and kept his promise, which either in jest or in earnest gave his classmates. When it was 15 years since graduation, Steve invited his classmates to a restaurant owned by Harry. Yesterday's underachiever became an equally cool businessman. After high school, life scattered the class to different parts of the world. Some became successful, others were content with the life of a simple, unremarkable representative of humanity. Most of the classmates communicated exclusively through social networks. As for Steve and Harry, their relationship became unexpectedly businesslike for both of them. Over time, mutually beneficial cooperation turned into a strong male friendship. It all began with the fact that the 2-year-old classmate came to the young banker for a loan for business development. Steve gave the former classmate a favorable loan. The restaurant business shot up, and Harry knew how to be grateful. He made Steve good discounts on banquets and romantic dinners in the wake of his beloved grandmother, and it all cost the banker in a purely symbolic amount. The 15th anniversary of his graduation coincided with Steve's return from Canada, where he had worked for 2 years on a contract. 2 weeks after his return, friends organized a celebratory dinner at a restaurant. Harry provided the space and engaged musicians. Steve paid for the food and drinks. From the rest of the classmates, men did not take a penny. By the way, Oliver was one of the honored guests at that meeting of classmates. Well done, Harry, he praised his former student. Honestly, I didn't expect it. It's all thanks to you, Harry replied with a smile. You've been pushing me in math, and this is the result. The old teacher laughed audibly, thinking that race was a bit of a mouthful. After all, Harry was getting in one ear and out the other. Still, Oliver was pleased. The boys hadn't forgotten the old mathematician, and that's worth a lot. Steve, are you married? Jessica, a beautiful but frivolous person, asked him. Back in high school, she had made eyes at Steve, but the guy seemed not to notice her flirtatious glances. Classmates danced a slow dance, and the banker suddenly felt that Jessica pressed against him a little tighter than the rules of propriety allow. Steve grinned faintly. Jessica had never been burdened with complexes. No, he answered simply. What's wrong? Jessica asked with undisguised curiosity. "What's wrong?" smiled Steve. "You're not married either, as far as I know." "I'm waiting for my bestie," Jessica said, looking at him meaningfully. "Well, I'm waiting for my bestie too." "And what is it, your most self?" asked the persistent woman. "How would I know?" Steve grinned. "I haven't met her yet. I'll meet her and I'll immediately realize. Here she is." "I see," Jessica said disappointedly. "Well, good luck finding her." Banker Steve was a public figure in town. Apparently, his bachelor status bothered almost all the single ladies. He was generally used to being approached by unencumbered women. Jessica was not the first and hardly the last. There were plenty of women who wanted to live in his beautiful and spacious country house. Some people in the business community made not very flattering assumptions about Steve, such as unconventional orientation or his love for women of advanced age. But the banker always despised and ignored gossip. Let them talk. Did Jessica have a good time? Harry asked with a chuckle as the door closed behind the last guest. Everyone was content to see each other, to enjoy some good food. There had been some mishaps, though. Frank got so drunk he fell off the stage. Fortunately, his classmate got off with a slight fright. The friends saw off the guests, listened to the words of gratitude, and then with a sense of accomplishment poured martinis into glasses and drank, snacking on olives. Yes, the friend smiled. You could say she was besieging me, all looking for a favorable party. She also hinted to me that we could be a perfect match. "Really? You're a married guy," Steve wondered. "That was a year and a half ago," the classmate explained. "Isabella and I had just started dating, so our Jessica tried to convince me that I couldn't find anyone better than her." "What does she do?" "She was in commercial real estate as a sole proprietor, but 2 years ago her business failed." "That's it." Steve grinned understandingly. "Uh-huh," nodded the restaurant owner, pouring a second one. "Jessica was used to living large, and now, as far as I understand, she's broke and looking for someone to improve her unenviable financial situation and intends to sell herself for more money. That's the system." "Yeah," Steve said sarcastically. "I don't envy it." "No kidding. How did you get her off?" "You blew her off, didn't you?" "Well, let's just say I politely let her know that we weren't going to get along." He smiled. "Good for you." "Hey, Steve, why don't we get drunk?" Harry suggested it. "Oh, Mel, some other time." The banker waved his hands. "I want to get a good night's sleep tomorrow. It's been a busy week." "It happens," Harry nodded. Steve lived in the country, and the cab ride, not counting the wait for the car, would take half an hour. And since it was Saturday, the wait could be longer. Steve looked at his watch and was surprised to find that it was not yet 7 o'clock. That's what it means to get a good night's sleep. The banker thought with satisfaction and shuddered at the thought of what would happen if he accepted his friend's offer. Definitely nothing good. Steve briskly strode into the kitchen and made coffee. A cup of scalding, aromatic coffee and a walk in the woods was the morning program of a successful young banker's day off. Steve drank his coffee leisurely, rinsed his cup, and putting on a t-shirt, shorts, and a light windbreaker, went for a walk. When Steve lived in Canada, he loved to go to the lakes and walk in the woods. Actually, it was from there that the banker brought his passion for morning walks. After such walks, his brain was charged for the week ahead, and the work was done. The man walked through the forest, breathing in the fragrant summer air with pleasure. He thought about the fact that Canada, of course, is a great country, but it was there that he realized how much he missed his native country. After the walk, Steve usually had breakfast and then spent the whole day idling, accumulating additional strength for a hard work week. After about 40 minutes, the banker headed home in anticipation of a delicious, nutritious breakfast and quality rest. Suddenly, he heard moans. Listening, Steve realized that the sounds came from the side of the road to the village. A wounded animal? Steve thought. No, it doesn't sound like it. Steve quickened his step, and when he came out of the woods, he was stunned. There was a bloody woman lying by the roadside. Apparently, she had been hit by a car. "The picture is clear," he summarized. "Hit and run. What kind of people are these?" Steve examined his pockets and cursed. His cell phone was at home, and he couldn't even call an ambulance. "Help," the woman barely audibly whispered and passed out. The banker knew that a car accident victim should not be touched until the medics arrived, Any movement could only hurt her. Yes, but what to do if he didn't have a phone? There were few cars on Sunday morning, but after about 10 minutes, Steve managed to pull over a silver foreign car and ask for a phone. "What's wrong?" the owner asked, looking suspiciously at the woman lying there. And then Steve, quite unexpectedly, gave out. "My wife and I quarreled. She ran away from home. And here you see, help me out, friend." Yes, of course, the man nodded sympathetically and handed Steve a cell phone. "Wait," the dispatcher said in an impassive voice. The banker was worried as if the stranger was really his wife. The poor woman gave no sign of life, and Steve wondered if she was alive. Taking a closer look at the woman, Steve noted that she was quite young and apparently pretty. What a subhuman, thought the banker again of the man who had run over the young woman. God forbid that all should be well. The ambulance doctor, after examining the woman, shook his head and voiced Steve's thoughts. "What kind of people are these? They don't have a cross on them." "What kind of people?" The driver shrugged his shoulders. He was afraid to face the law and was gone. The woman was put on a stretcher and the doctor said, addressing Steve, "You need to come with us too." He wanted to ask why, but remembering that he introduced himself as the husband of the victim, sat down in the car without complaint. "Well, and why do I need it? I did my job, so why am I sitting here?" Once again thought Steve, sitting near the examination room. Tomorrow at work, Monday, as you know, Monday is a hard day, and anyway, what's he got to do with it? He tried to leave in English several times, but never did. And when Steve decided to flee, the doctor came out of the room. "Are you the spouse of the victim?" he asked. Steve wanted to say that he was not her husband, but just a passerby who couldn't pass by, but his tongue stuck to his mouth. "Well then," said the doctor in a businesslike tone, "your wife's life is out of danger. Her spine is intact, but she has lost her memory." "Lost her memory?" Steve asked in amazement. Wow. He realized, of course, that the human body was a mechanism in which a great many different processes took place. But memory loss seemed to Steve something from the realm of television series. In his mind, no matter what soap opera, someone is bound to lose his memory. He himself was not fond of soap operas, but after hearing a couple of conversations between his mother and her friends, the banker made just such a conclusion. And now Steve was an unwitting witness to memory loss. "Yes," nodded the doctor, whose name, as the inscription on his badge said, was Alexander. "Your wife has retrograde amnesia. Forgive my ignorance, but could you explain what it is?" The doctor began to explain, juggling with abstruse medical terms of which Steve didn't understand half. Actually, he understood only that the memory could be restored in a week or in several years. "Is there a cure?" Steve said confusedly. "Of course, we will try to speed up the process with the help of medications and perhaps hypnosis," Alexander replied. "But based on experience, I want to note that most often memory returns when a person is reminded of something about his past, or as a result of a strong shock." "Well, thank you for the information," the banker said thoughtfully. "And do I need it?" thought Steve again as he left the hospital. Dr. Alexander gave him an impressive list of medications and also said goodbye. "Don't forget to drop off your wife's paperwork tomorrow." Steve introduced the woman as Maria. It was the first name that came to his mind. The banker went to the reception desk and asked for a cab, once again asking himself the same question. When he got home, Steve went up to the second floor, which used to be the attic. It's nice here in the summer. It's cozy, and most importantly, not hot. He went out on the balcony and thoughtfully looked around. Not far from the village where the banker lived, there were scattered godforsaken villages. Looking toward the forest, Steve sighed. But now another phrase came to his mind. "We are responsible for those whom we have tamed." And Steve was also sure. This young woman did not just appear in his life. "Well, and with the documents somehow we'll sort it out," summarized the banker. Veronica's life was difficult to call serene, but the woman did not think to complain about it. Moreover, in all the trials of life that fell to her share, Veronica saw a positive moment. Life hardships made her stronger, for which the woman was immensely grateful to them. 6 months ago, Veronica had a grief. Her only daughter Maria went missing, and the inconsolable mother was left with an 8-year-old granddaughter, Elizabeth. So she had no right to be discouraged. After all, if something happened to her, and the girl will go straight to the orphanage. His only daughter Veronica gave birth out of wedlock and lived with her in the dormitory of the factory, in which she then worked as a secretary. The young mother came out of maternity leave and registered Maria in kindergarten, but the little girl began to be sick often. The management of the planet, to put it mildly, did not suit. They couldn't fire her for this, of course, but to force to dismiss at will quite well. Favor, sycophants, and intriguers, which the bosses, yes, used in their own interests, was plenty. Veronica was accused of stealing, which she did not commit. Unfortunately, to prove otherwise, when the bosses are determined to dismiss, is simply unrealistic. Considering that you are a conscientious employee, we will not make a fuss, said the director, averting his sly little eyes. Well, you should, but I offer you two options, resignation or dismissal by article. The choice was obvious, so the young mother was left without a job and without a place to live. Veronica and her daughter returned to her native village and settled in a dilapidated shack she had inherited from her late parents. The only person who treated the young woman humanely was Betty, an employee of the village council. This kind woman helped them to improve their living conditions, for which Veronica was eternally grateful to her. The specialist of the village administration helped them to get the house of a lonely old woman who had died alone and had no heirs. In addition, Betty helped Veronica with her job. With the help of a kind woman, the young mother got a job at the school as a checkroom attendant and a janitor in one person. The villagers disliked Veronica and talked about her inappropriately. And when Maria grew up, the locals transferred this dislike to her. The girl was blossoming and getting better, outshining the rest of the village girls, and the locals whispered, "She will go to study and bring her mother a bistruck. You can't get oranges from an aspen tree." Alas, their words were prophetic. Once coming home for the weekend, Maria confessed to her mother that she was pregnant. To say that Veronica was upset was to say nothing, and she had dreamed that her daughter's life would be better than hers. But everything seems to be repeating itself. No, Veronica was not angry with her daughter. After all, a child, regardless of the circumstances of birth, is happiness. Nor did she get under Marie's skin with questions about the child's father. And so everything is clear. "Nothing, we'll get through," Veronica said to her daughter. "I lifted you up, and together we are strength." Maria nodded, but when she looked at her mother, Veronica's heart squeezed painfully. It was the look of a beaten dog. No wonder she'd get whipped. But that was half the problem. Maria had to study. Of course, no one canceled the sabbatical, but she had only a year to study. So the defense of the long-awaited diploma of psychologist postponed for a year or two. Elizabeth was born healthy and as beautiful as her mother. The times when single mothers were cast oblique glances, long ago and safely past, but apparently not for everyone. At least not for young, but ugly obese married ladies. Oh yes, no chance Maria will encroach on their two-legged happiness, which she does not need a gift. Meanwhile, Maria had completely different concerns. She did not take a leave of absence and transferred to the correspondence department. "That's right," agreed her mother. "What to lose a year or even two? Well, in 2 sessions we'll somehow survive. I'll take time off, sit with Elizabeth, while you will be at the session." After the defense of the diploma, it was necessary to think about employment, and as soon as possible. Veronica's penny salary and childcare allowance were barely enough for the essentials. "Would you like to be a psychologist at our school?" asked Betty, now a pensioner, who was a frequent visitor to Veronica's house. The prospect of working as a psychologist in her native school did not entice the university graduate. And not because this option was far from prestigious. She would not fit into the team. "They'll survive." "No, Aunt Betty, I don't want to," shook her head. "Our financial situation, of course, leaves much to be desired, but no, you understand." Betty didn't understand. She just wanted to help these people who were almost family. "I'll try to get a job in town," Maria said. But it wasn't so easy. Most employers, when they heard that she lived in the village, made frightened eyes. "How will you get there?" "By bus," Maria shrugged. But apparently, this argument did not seem too convincing to them. Lack of work experience and a small child also did not contribute to successful employment. However, the young mother did not think to be discouraged. All this is temporary, she said. Sooner or later something will turn up. And she was right. After a couple of months of struggling, Maria managed to get a job at the Center for Psychological Assistance to Children and Adolescents. Years went by. Life went on as usual and seemed to be getting better. However, fate continued to test Veronica's family's strength. One day, Maria did not return from work. That day, she called her mother and warned that she had a lot of work, so she would come by cab. Veronica called her daughter several times, but she did not answer. Why doesn't Mom answer? Elizaveta asked through tears. Mom has just a lot of work, she said, trying her best to smile, answered her grandmother. Go to sleep, kitten. Until Mommy comes, I won't lie down, the girl said and sobbed even more. Veronica was sure something had happened to her daughter. The woman pressed the trembling granddaughter to herself, and when she, sobbing, fell asleep, sighed with relief. But what will happen tomorrow? Veronica went to the police as if to work. We're looking for her. The employees were looking for her. The poor woman only nodded doubtfully, but one day she couldn't stand it. I'd like to know how you're looking for her. After all, Maria is not a needle and still there. Don't yell at me, the policeman exclaimed indignantly. We have dozens of them, besides your Maria. Maybe your Maria has taken a stroll, and you are worried. You should have brought up your daughter better. How dare you? A woman graying with grief shook her head. I dare, said the police officer. Unfortunately, we have a carload and a small cart of such cases. And softened, added, I understand your grief, but you also understand us. We're doing our best, but so far, alas. I see, with a sigh, said Veronica, and went out, thinking that now she will come home, and there Elizabeth. The girl is so hopeful that her mom will be found. Posts on social networks, except for comments from sympathetic citizens, did not yield any results. The fellow villagers had their own opinion on the matter. She left for a beautiful life and did not return, neighbors maligned, and she didn't spare her little one. I guess she's already serving daddies with fat wallets somewhere abroad. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Betty reprimanded them. A man's in grief, and all you want to do is scratch your tongues. Is that all you can think of? The kind woman supported Veronica and Elizabeth as best she could, but it wasn't enough. A month passed and Maria never showed up. In her mind, Veronica accepted that something terrible had happened to Maria, something very, very bad. But her maternal heart refused to accept it. Elizabeth withdrew into herself. She sat silent for long periods of time, staring out of the window. Mother is waiting, Veronica thought with a sigh. The poor woman was not the least bit relieved, but who but she had to be strong. Besides, one had to survive. It was hard to survive on the salary of a janitorial checkroom attendant, not to mention living with a child. Veronica occasionally looked through the newspapers for vacancies. She was ready to take any job, even the dirtiest one with a miserable salary, but rejection followed rejection. An old woman from the countryside was not the most attractive candidate. Terrible, Betty shook her head. Veronica, why don't you start selling, say, pies? And in August you'll pick tomatoes and cucumbers and start selling them too. Otherwise you'll be lost. And so kopecheka to kopecheka. Veronica thought about it. Why? It's a very good idea. Her piroshki, belyashi, sausages in dough and other baked goods are excellent. Tomato and cucumber harvest too, God willing. Angry neighbors even, there were times, whispered that this witch scares away weeds, so she grows everything. Veronica laughed. So be it. Less tongue-tie will be less, or else, just in case, I'll deprive them all of the gift of speech. Business went unexpectedly well. Veronica baked pies and other goodies, and Betty and her husband delivered them to cafes and diners on their old tin. There was enough work, and the grandmother and granddaughter were fed, clothed, and clothed. Having gathered an impressive harvest in August, Veronica, with the help of Betty and her granddaughter, rolled up about 50 different caliber jars of cucumbers, tomatoes, assorted, and patisans. Our company is thriving, Elizabeth said proudly. Veronica smiled and sighed furtively. She realized that her granddaughter was trying to hold on, but only the grandmother and the pillow knew how many tears this little girl had shed. It's hard to lose a mother at any age. And if you're only 8 years old, a few days before the new year, Elizabeth said. Bah, tomorrow I'm coming with you. Veronica planned to sell pickles on the highway. What are you doing there? The old woman asked in surprise. And if you get bored there, stay at home with Aunt Betty. I won't get bored, the girl said stubbornly. I want to go with you. Oh, please, I'll stay out of your way. I'll be quiet, like a mouse. Veronica thought about it. Actually, it wasn't too cold outside. The place near the covered bus stop was quite busy and popular, mostly with single truckers who wanted to buy homemade pickles. The buses to the village ran well, and if Elizaveta got bored, Veronica could send her home safely. And Betty, if anything, and will meet and look after and help to melt the stove. All right, agreed, answered her grandmother with a smile, and Elizaveta, giving a triumphant cry, went to dress. You have a helper today, I see, smiled Anna, an elderly, burly woman from the neighboring village. She was selling homemade lard. Today, in addition to the lard, she had 3 goose carcasses. Yes, smiled Veronica. Well, good assistant, nodded approvingly and turned to the girl. What's your name, beautiful girl? Elizaveta, she answered importantly. Well, and me, Baba Anna. Let's get acquainted. Here, take this candy. Eat it, so to speak, for getting acquainted. Thank you, Elizabeth nodded politely. The trade was going well. The main clientele were dacha owners who planned to celebrate the new year in the country. The first customer was a man in his 50s. He bought from Veronica 3 2-liter jars of cucumber and tomato assortment, after which he approached a neighbor. He bought a good piece of lard, a goose, and encouraged by the words of the women, eat with pleasure, drove off in the direction of the city. 15 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up. A young man of about 25 and a lady of about 40 with a tail, wearing a mink coat and red lacquered boots, got out of the car. How much are the geese? He asked Anna cheerfully. 700 rubles, smiled the peddler. Archie, the lady exclaimed in horror. Don't tell me you're going to eat it. You got it absolutely right, confirmed the guy. I'll bake it with apples, with a ruddy crust. Nice. Or would you rather have it in beer? That's a good one. My son has to eat right, the woman retorted. Mom, calm down. This is the right diet, the guy said admonishingly, and ignoring the indignant look of his loving mother, took money out of his wallet. It's all cholesterol, the woman persisted. Yes, and very tasty cholesterol. Archie waved his hands and, wishing the women a happy new year, walked to the car. The buyer's mother said something about not caring about health and position in society. He objected cheerfully, and then the SUV started and drove off into the countryside, most likely to a dacha village where rich people lived. The women laughed merrily. Yes, I don't envy this lover of good food. Anna laughed through her tears. I suppose his mother gives him steamed cutlets and stewed vegetables. That's right. Veronica picked up on it, and without salt. The old businesswoman laughed again. Today, they had worked hard. By lunchtime, all the goods were sold, and Anna called her son-in-law to pick her up. He arrived about 20 minutes later, and the women warmly said goodbye and congratulated each other on the coming holiday. Baba, I want to eat, Elizabeth whimpered. All the food supplies had been eaten, and the bus was delayed. Besides, suddenly there was a strong wind. Is there a snowstorm coming? Veronica was worried. The bus was still not coming, and the elderly woman called the dispatcher's office, where she was told that the bus was delayed. A few minutes later, something unimaginable began. It seemed that the snowstorm, which despite Veronica's fears still played out, would now pick them up and carry them away for faraway lands. The woman liked what was happening less and less. Let's go beyond the stop. It's not so snowy there, she said to the crying Elizaveta, thinking at the same time, what an old fool. Well, why the devil did she bring the child with her? And just they took a step beyond the stop, as a truck rushed past them, and Veronica, not keeping her balance, flew into the ditch. Elizabeth was stunned, and then screamed as loud as she could. Grandma, bada. Now, grandmother barely audibly moaned, writhing in pain, though she wanted to howl, but she couldn't scare the child. Now, dearie, I'll come up and... Veronica fainted. When Elizabeth saw that her grandmother had suddenly closed her eyes, she sobbed out loud. Grandma, no, she cried. And cars were passing by, and none of them cared about the crying girl. At first, Elizaveta wanted to go down to her grandmother, but realized that the two of them could not get up. It would be better to ask someone for help. The girl went out onto the road and frantically waved her arms. "Help!" Elizabeth shouted tearfully, smearing tears on her face. She was very scared, and the cars kept coming and coming. "Is there a problem, young lady?" asked a young, richly dressed man who got out of a glossy black car. Any help needed? Steve did a lot of charity work. Right now, he was on his way back from a New Year's Eve party for orphanage children. The sponsor of the party was his bank, and Mr. Steve came to the tree to get a legitimate portion of applause and gratitude. To tell the truth, he never liked to show off. Yes, Steve drove an expensive car and wore brand-name clothes, but he knew he had earned it all through hard work. Unlike unnecessary, in general, praise in public, Steve sincerely believed that good deeds should be done in silence. Although, of course, if the management of orphanages are pleased to thank him in this way, publicly and pompously, well, it's their right. Everything is better than mercantile ladies desperately trying to marry a young banker. Remembering the hunters for his money, Steve grinned. That was it. There was nothing more for them. That June morning changed his life dramatically. The day after the accident victim arrived at the hospital with Steve, he went there again. The banker brought all the necessary medications and asked how she was. "No change," Alexander replied. "I think you'll be able to visit your wife in a day or two." The words "visit your wife," although they sounded unusual to the ear of a 32-year-old bachelor, unexpectedly liked Steve. When he realized this, he was very surprised. Maybe it's a sign that it's really time for me to get married. After all around say so, ironically thought the banker. With documents was more difficult, but Steve told the doctor that he found no passport or policy. Apparently, Maria left the house with the documents. He guiltily waved his hands. "But when I found her, she didn't have her purse. So, you know what I mean." "Yes, but then." Dr. Alexander made a meaningful pause, and Steve understood him perfectly. "How much?" he asked. "There on the wall is a price list of paid services," Alexander replied. Steve nodded and, after studying the cost of the services, turned back to the doctor. He pulled out his wallet, took out two $5,000 bills, and slipped them into the pocket of the doctor's coat. "Payment for services at the registrar's office," Alexander said, a little embarrassed. "Thank you for the information," smiled the banker. "I will pay now. And this money is my gift to you." Well, thank you. But you may want to move your wife to a private clinic. Usually people in your line of work." "I don't know what people in our circle do, but somehow I trust you," Dr. Steve interrupted cheerfully, "and I hope you'll justify my trust." "I'll do my best," Alexander replied with dignity. On the third day of his spouse's stay in the hospital, Steve visited her. On the way, he bought fruit, a bottle of fresh juice from his favorite restaurant, and wild tea roses. Approaching the hospital, the banker realized that he was worried. Just like before a first date, he cheered up and thought that was essentially what it was. When Steve entered the room, a young woman was half sitting on a cushion and looking straight ahead. The patient raised her large and serious brown eyes to Steve, and the banker realized he was missing. "Why, she's not just pretty," marveled Steve. "She's a real beauty. And no pouty lips and those creepy eyebrows halfway down her forehead." By the way, the eyebrows, like the eyes, struck the man in the heart. Dark, parted, beautifully shaped. The brown hair of the beautiful stranger was gathered in a careless knot, but Steve had no doubt that it was beautiful. Or was that what he wanted to think? After examining his charge, Steve opened his mouth to ask how she was feeling, but the young woman beat him to it. "Are you my husband?" she asked quietly and hesitantly, crumpling the corner of the blanket. "That's not really true," Steve replied softly. He had no desire to lie to a man who was in a helpless state. Besides, the banker no longer doubted for a moment that he had fallen in love like a boy. So he mentally stated with great regret that he could not do without a certain amount of lying. "All right, we'll figure it out," Steve decided lightly, unable to take his eyes off the sick woman. "Not really." She raised an eyebrow, and Steve mentally groaned. At this moment, Maria, as he introduced her to the doctor, was just unrealistically beautiful. Then what would happen when the bruises and abrasions came off that pretty face? I'll probably go crazy with love, Steve thought with a chuckle. So much for the one and only. Steve wasn't really amused. To think that for once he was in love. Except the circumstances weren't exactly ideal, to say the least. Hush, hush, the banker soothed his conscience. I will definitely confess everything. Now for me, the task number one, to create for Maria the most comfortable conditions. By the way, I wonder what her name is really. The young woman stared at him, and Steve remembered that she was waiting for an answer. Yes, not really, he confirmed. It's just that you and I were just about to get married. I see. Maria nodded, and Steve thought, it's not easy to lie to my eyes, at least for me. Come on. Again, the man began to reason with his conscience. No one has ever abolished lying for salvation. An old miracle. My conscience was soothed. I was told my name was Maria, she said. And you? It's funny, of course, to meet your future husband. And the beauty laughed her melodious laugh. Yes, it is funny indeed, he agreed. But it's normal in our case, isn't it? Yes, I guess so. So what's your name? I'm Steve, the banker replied and smiled slyly. And it's a pleasure to meet you. You too, Maria said, and her voice sounded sincere. Unless, of course, Steve was wishful thinking, but apparently not. The young woman looked at him sympathetically and, incidentally, not without interest. He knew that woman's look. And the flowers are very pretty, she added with a smile. I tried, Steve replied with genuine tenderness in his voice, and thought he would do it as often as possible. Lying is disgusting, but he would try to win this beauty over. And who knows, maybe the matter will really end in a wedding. 2 weeks later, Steve took Maria home. At first, he planned to make her a fake passport. The money and connections allowed him to do it. But then the banker abandoned the idea. It was one thing to lie to the doctor that he and Maria were married. Otherwise, Steve wouldn't have been allowed to see her. But to slip a fake passport to a man whose memory is like a blank slate is a real pig. Steve told the doctor that it would take at least a month to restore the documents, and he only nodded understandingly. 2 weeks passed, and except for the loss of memory, the young woman felt quite tolerable. So Alexander decided that she could be discharged, and it turned out that in the end the doctor turned a blind eye to the lack of documents, for which he received a good sum at discharge. On the eve of discharge day, Steve called his friend Harry. So tell me, where does your Isabel address? Harry was in the know, so his classmate's question didn't surprise him. I never realized you were such an adventurer, Harry remarked when the banker told him of his intentions. I didn't think so myself, Steve admitted, and then his friend handed the phone to his wife. Isabella listed her favorite ladies' stores, and the banker, thanking her, went shopping. The sales girls looked curiously at the man, in whom they recognized the owner of the bank, but did not say anything. But Steve was a sharp shooter. The banker knew exactly. These clever bitches with model looks are probably wondering for whom the famous banker buys all this closet. He quite admitted that not today, so tomorrow, the report from the shopping will excite the city. Oh, the internet. Steve had bought everything needed for a complete ladies' closet from lingerie to outerwear. Thank God I'm not tight on funds, he thought. Otherwise, how will I get by? On the day of the discharge, Steve bought Marie a beautiful dress, shoes, a luxurious basket of roses, and gently putting her in the car, said, "Shall we go home?" She only nodded with a smile. In those 2 weeks, Steve and Maria, or who was she, had become very attached to each other. All the patients were jealous of this beautiful brunette with the shy smile. One could only dream of Steve's reverence for her. I wonder how they would react if they knew the truth. The banker had asked himself that question more than once. What did he care about some strange women, though? But the question of how the lady of his heart would feel about this lie really did not give Steve peace. And although he repeatedly entered into dialogues with his conscience, trying to convince her that there will be a day there will be food, on Steve's soul was sticky and dirty residue. But one way or another, Maria had to be taken to his house. Where would he take her? Steve couldn't help but realize that Maria's relatives might be looking for her. So one evening he took a picture of the young woman and posted a post on social networks. However, the result was zero. One single user left a comment that not so long ago someone was looking for a similar girl, And that was it. Then Steve had no time to post. He was busy at work, and when he remembered about it again, he reasonably decided that the relatives of his ward, if any, could do something about it themselves. Hiring a nurse was not an option. Maria served herself and did not go beyond the territory. "What if I get lost?" she said with a laugh. "Then I promise to walk you around the village every day," solemnly swore Steve. "I assure you, there is much to see here." And they walked, swimming in the lake, picking flowers, berries, and then mushrooms. It was really great, but the lies poisoned all the joy. Maria felt quite well. The only thing that bothered the young woman was periodic attacks of headache, but Alexander prescribed pills for that. All that remained was to wait. But for what? Marital relations were out of the question. Spouses slept in separate bedrooms, although to hide it, there were some playful thoughts. You're not a monk, and when the house walks such a beauty with a seductive figure, it is difficult to think only about nature and the weather. There are probably men out there who would take advantage of the situation, but because Steve was a decent man, this did not happen. He decided at once, if it does happen, it'll be fair. It would be a good idea to get to know each other better first, but it's easy to say, get to know each other. A person who is faced with the loss of a relative's memory will have to, shall we say, familiarize him with himself. But after all, Steve himself knew nothing about the young woman he had given the name Maria. Yes, the situation, he thought. If someone had told me under what circumstances I would meet my love, I would never have believed it. In the meantime, Steve was being bombarded with questions. Where and how did we meet? Do we have kids? Have we lived here long? And so on. Steve felt like his brain was about to explode. When Maria asked him to tell the story of how they met, he mumbled something like, just an ordinary college party. We liked each other so. Where did we go to school? The young woman asked, looking at Steve inquisitively with her beautiful eyes. Good question, grinned Steve mentally. Well, it's all clear with me, but where did she study? The Institute of Commerce and Law. He named the school he had graduated from. Yes, Maria asked with surprise and thought deeply. And Steve thought, that would be funny if she graduated from some Sharashkinway office, and I attributed to her a prestigious university. Steve suddenly remembered what Maria was wearing when he discovered her. She was wearing a summer business suit. This suggested that Maria worked for a decent organization that accepted people with a college degree. Well, or at least graduates of technical schools. So, a Sharashkin office could be safely dismissed. When Alexander gave Steve this outfit, the banker did not hesitate to burn it. The suit was torn, blood-stained, and unwearable. So maybe you shouldn't have done it, Harry snorted. What if your beautiful stranger had seen it and remembered what had happened to her and who she was? Steve slammed his fist on his forehead. What an idiot, he exclaimed. That's right, isn't it? But on the other hand, is it worth scaring her? Also true. One day Steve woke up to a mind-blowing odor. It smelled of coffee and something else distinctly meaty. The intrigued banker sharply threw off the blanket and went to the kitchen, where he saw a rather nice picture. Maria, dressed in a light olive-colored silk robe, which went surprisingly well with her dark eyes and hair, was frying pancakes. Some of the pancakes, filled with chopped chicken and mushrooms, were laid out on a platter. What wonderful flavors, Steve said excitedly. Can I try some? Of course, smiled Maria. Do you want it with sour cream? Yes, he nodded, pouring himself some orange juice. And she's a very decent cook, thought the banker. Steve was pleasantly surprised. Pretty slim, economical, and she seemed to have a good character. We should take her. Do you like her? The ward asked. Very much. With a satisfied smile, Steve replied, reaching out for another pancake. Did I often make pancakes? Often, said Steve laconically, hoping that would be the case. Steve sighed, Maria said, and the banker realized there was another batch of questions to come. Yes, trying to sound carefree, he said. What did his ward have in store for him this time? Steve, do we have any pictures of us together? That's why I'm asking. Maybe if I saw them, I'd remember everything. Well, it's unbearable to live without knowing who I am, Maria finished pathetically. Steve sighed. Here we go again. What's so strange about it, though? It's a predictable question, and if you think about it, it's strange that she didn't ask it right away. But when your head's a mess, it's really hard to think straight. You see, Maria, Steve said slowly, thinking up an explanation as he went along. The photo albums were lost when I moved into this house. Sure, I had a lot of photos on my smartphone, but I lost it not too long ago. And when I bought a new one, we somehow didn't take pictures. I had a lot of work to do. I see. But I promised to make up for it. You and I will definitely be photographed together, smiled Steve, and looking at the clock added, and now I have to go to work. Thanks for breakfast. It was delicious. Got away with it, Steve thought, starting up his infinity. Once again, Maria's memory was stubbornly unwilling to recover, and Steve had mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, the young banker was used to the company of a mysterious, beautiful stranger. And if Maria remembered who she was and where she came from, she would return to her former life. But what about him? On the other hand, he wished this story would end soon. But Steve was afraid to imagine what the outcome would be. Would he be accused of holding the man down? True, Maria's relatives never showed up, but who knows what was wrong? Maybe they hadn't seen his post. Steve envisioned the bold headlines in the media and on the internet. Banker Steve held woman down. Thinking about it, Steve hummed cheerfully. That's how they lived. Maria cooked delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners. Steve worked and pleased his beloved with bouquets of flowers and arranged shopping for her. From time to time, the ward would ask him questions and Steve would come up with answers. A few months later, Marie had a dream. The young woman dreamed that she was holding a baby in her arms. Waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, Maria made her way determinedly to Steve's room. Maria? He was surprised. Is something wrong? Are you sick? Steve, tell me, did we have a child? Persistently asked the ward. A baby? What baby? I had a dream that I was holding a baby in my arms. Oh, a dream? Steve was relieved. Well, it was just a dream. I mean, how many dreams can you have? That doesn't mean it's true. Yes, I understand, Maria said excitedly. But, it was like it was real. And it's like my brain cleared up. Steve, I think I'm starting to remember. The banker's heart started to race. Well, that's it. Now Maria's going to say he's been lying to her, and she wants nothing to do with Steve. What did you remember? He asked breathlessly. I remembered that my name was really Maria, the young woman said with a smile in her voice. And it was real. Well, that's interesting. So Steve, spontaneously thinking up a name for her, had hit the nail on the head. It's hardly a figment of his ward's imagination. Dr. Alexander explained that during the process of memory retrieval, a person remembers everything that actually happened. So, is it the child too? Not a fact, the banker pondered. She remembered her name in reality, and the child was a dream. But one way or another, it must be finished. What if we hire a private detective? Struck the young banker, and he wondered how this simple thought had not occurred to him at once. Done. In the morning, Steve had to go to the New Year's party for the children of the orphanage. Then he would confess everything to Maria, apologize, and find a private detective. Steve looked at his ward. Maria was sleeping sweetly, sniffling like a little girl, and looked incredibly touching. No, he couldn't let go of this amazing girl so easily. We'll be together, vowed Steve. Whatever it takes. What a weather, Evan, the banker's driver muttered in a disgruntled voice. It was so calm in the morning, and now the windshield wipers were failing, and the ice chips were hitting the windshield audibly. Steve was tuning in for a difficult conversation with Maria and was very nervous. And then there was the snowstorm, which had played out so inconveniently. After a couple of kilometers, the men groaned. Right on the roadway stood a little girl and desperately waved her hands. Where had she come from? Evan slowed down, Steve said, though he didn't need to. The driver was already slowing down. The men jumped out of the car, and the banker asked if the girl needed help. There, the little girl sobbed, pointing toward the ditch. My grandmother. She fell. She's sick. Evan and Steve didn't waste time talking. The banker put the little girl in the car and they ran to the ditch. Once down, the men found an elderly woman. She was unconscious. The driver touched her pulse and convinced that the woman was alive, picked her up in his arms and carried her to the car. "Grandmother," cried the little girl on a burst of tears. Poor grandmother. In the warm car, Veronica regained consciousness and moaned. "What's the matter with you?" Steve asked. "My leg," whispered the old woman, and tears came to her eyes. "It really hurts." She could have broken her leg, thought the banker, considering what to do. If he called an ambulance, he did not know when it would arrive. In this blizzard. "We'll take you to the hospital now," Steve said softly. "No," the older woman shook her head. "I can't go to the hospital, but you could have a fracture." "Elizaveta, there's no one to leave her with," she said faintly. "Babs, I can and alone," assured the granddaughter. "Or at Aunt Ira's I'll spend the night." "But what if something serious?" "Here's what, ladies," Steve made a decision. "Now we'll take you to the hospital, and I can take the girl with me. Don't worry, I don't mean any harm." The grandmother and granddaughter hesitantly looked at each other, and Evan said with a smile, "Steve is a kind-hearted man. We're gonna be waiting a long time for an ambulance." "Well, if it's not too much trouble," Veronica said quietly, thinking that the world is not without good people. The snowstorm was slowly but surely subsiding, so they reached the city quite quickly. When they arrived at the trauma center, Steve felt a sense of déjà vu. Despite the tragedy of the situation, the man grinned mentally. He seemed to be making a habit of picking people up on the road. "Steve, you idiot." He berated himself for making such stupid jokes. Seeing a modestly dressed woman getting out of a premium car accompanied by a distinguished gentleman, the doctor was surprised. However, recognizing the respectable man as an old acquaintance, Alexander was glad to see him as his own. Maybe he would give him some more money. "What are you doing here?" he asked, shaking the banker's hand. "I brought my grandmother," Steve explained. "Picked her up on the highway. She may have broken her leg." "Well, we'll see. Let me know what's wrong with her." "Okay." The surprised doctor shrugged his shoulders and disappeared into the examination room. After about 20 minutes, Alexander came out and said, "Grandma's leg is indeed broken. Fortunately, the fracture is uncomplicated. Can I take her away?" "No." Alexander shook his head. "We'll leave Grandma for a week." "I see," nodded the banker. "Maybe you need something. Some medicine or something?" "No. The hospital has everything we need. Maybe some vitamins, calcium to strengthen the bones, or cottage cheese, dairy, fish." "Got it." The doctor was completely confused. Is he going to buy food and medicine for a strange granny? Alexander thought, perplexed. There's nowhere to put the money. "Then I'll go to the store." Steve confirmed his assumptions. After picking up a full bag of fruit, yogurt, cottage cheese, a large box of juice, and a couple of chicken breasts in the supermarket, the banker took the products to the hospital and they rolled back. "Let's go to my place," Steve said cheerfully to the little passenger. Elizabeth nodded importantly. The girl felt that this rich uncle on a beautiful car is a good and kind man. "And what do you do?" daring asked Elizabeth. "I am a banker," smiled Steve. "Banker," with respect stretched out the girl and simply asked, "You must be rich." "Rich," he did not hide the obvious. "Great," Elizabeth said approvingly. "I think so too," laughed the banker. The roads were thoroughly snowed over, and there was a long traffic jam on the way out of town. "I should call Maria," Steve thought, and took out his cell phone and dialed her number. "Don't worry, it's just a traffic jam," he said. "Maria, I'm not alone tonight." No, it's not friends or partners. You'll see later." "Sure, get some sleep. You'll feel better." "It's probably from the sudden change of weather." The banker added one last thing. "Whatever you say, darling. Kisses." "Is this your wife?" Elizaveta asked in a businesslike manner. "Well, you could say that," Steve sighed. "Why can you say that?" the girl asked, giving Steve a piercing look. At that moment, Elizabeth reminded him of someone. "But who?" "How can I explain it to you?" he answered, thinking that an affirmative answer would have been enough. "Now you explain." "It's just that we live together, but not officially signed," Steve said, and the girl nodded thoughtfully. "I see, you have a civil marriage." "Well, in general, yes," summarized the banker. Steve and his little guest arrived in the village in the evening. "Wow, what a beautiful house," exclaimed Elizabeth when they drove up to Steve's mansion. I'm glad you like it, smiled the owner of the house. Come on in. Don't be shy. And where is your wife? Asked the girl. My wife is not feeling well right now, but when she sleeps, she will feel better, and she will definitely join us. Is your wife pretty? Very beautiful, smiled the banker. For me, she is the most beautiful. You are a lucky man, summarized the girl. I think so too, laughed the man. But you know what would make me even happier? What? Elizabeth asked with interest. A delicious and nutritious dinner. I don't know about you, but I'm starving. Are you? I am, the little guest admitted maturely. Steve heated up a soup with mixed vegetables and beefsteak from Harry's restaurant. They were accompanied by rice and spaghetti. The hospitable host asked Elizabeth what she would eat the steaks with, and the girl opted for spaghetti. Great, Steve said. I'll heat up the spaghetti now. In the meantime, we'll have soup. It's perfect for the cold weather. While the guest appetizingly nibbled on vegetable soup, the banker looked at her with curiosity. He liked the girl, so pretty and smart. Suddenly, Steve thought that he could have a daughter of the same age, or a son. Elizabeth, how old are you? Steve asked. 8. And I'm 32. 24 is a normal age to be a father. And my parents keep asking me when I'm going to give them grandchildren. God, what's going through my head? Uncle Steve, how did you become a banker? Elizabeth suddenly asked him, and he almost choked. What can I say? An unexpected question for an 8-year-old girl. The numbskull is already 10, so he seems to be interested in nothing but computer games. Well, I wanted to be a banker for starters, Steve chuckled. 6th grade. I was told I could change my mind 100 times before I graduated, but no. And after school, I went to the Institute of Commerce and Law. Then I worked in a solid company, took advanced training courses, and as a consequence, started my own business. Elizabeth listened attentively, looking at the banker with respect. And when Steve stopped talking, she asked, Are there any female bankers? And yes, inquisitive God, thought Steve and replied, Well, why not? Elizabeth, I'll tell you this. It's not gender that matters, it's responsibility. Irresponsible people have nothing to do in the financial sphere. And of course, the desire to constantly learn and develop. During the conversation, they did not notice how Maria entered the kitchen. Something I'm not good today, she said faintly and greeted the little guest with a smile. Hello. Let's get acquainted. My name is Maria. Elizabeth looked at the woman who entered with all her eyes. The girl looked at Maria as if she recognized someone in her, but she was not sure that she was not mistaken. What happened next left Steve completely stunned. Mom? His young guest whispered in shock and rushed to Maria without hesitation. All day Maria had not been feeling well. She had a headache, but on top of that, the young woman was somehow uncomfortable. Then there was that dream about the baby. After Steve's call, she felt a little better. Maria looked out the window and looked out at the snowy surroundings and realized why she felt uneasy. The young woman was certain she had a child, or even had one. But then where was it now? And most importantly, why was Steve hiding it? And maybe something happened to our child, and that's why I lost my memory. Frowning, Maria thought, and Steve does not tell me anything, because he is afraid for my psyche. But my memory will come back sooner or later. Her head didn't hurt anymore, but she felt physically heavy from thinking. The young woman fell asleep, as she usually did after taking the medicine the doctor had prescribed. She lay in bed and instantly fell asleep. Through her sleep, Maria heard a car pull up, and after a while she heard the voice of Steve and a little girl. Hearing the child's voice, Maria thought she was hallucinating. The voice of the child, most likely a girl, seemed vaguely familiar to Maria. For whatever reason, the child's voice only made her more certain that the child was not just a dream or a figment of her imagination distorted by memory loss. As Maria descended the stairs, the child's voice became more and more distinct. Her head suddenly felt treacherously dizzy. She leaned on the railing, and when it was gone, she walked on. Maria was already in the kitchen. The girl sat at the table across from Steve and munched on her soup. What a pretty little girl, thought Maria, and a powerful wave of tenderness suddenly came over her. The guest was dark-haired and brown-eyed like herself. But where had this little girl come from? The young woman greeted the little girl warmly, and she looked at Maria with a look that made her heart sink. And before Maria knew it, the girl had called her mommy. She said it in a whisper, but Maria's voice seemed like the sound of thunder. Before the eyes of the young woman appeared some vague fragments of memories. Here was Maria holding the newborn girl, swaddling her and whispering some tender words. The village, angry and jealous gossipy neighbors, and this girl, who was now sitting at the table with her husband. But now the young woman remembered quite clearly that she had never been married. But then why had Steve called himself her husband? Maria remembered a car coming at her, and she didn't have time to run aside. The next thing she knew, it was total darkness. But before plunging into that darkness, the young woman was rushing home from town. To this very girl who was her daughter Elizabeth, and to her mother, whose name was Veronica. Maria's memory unraveled like a ball of thread. She remembered, and Elizabeth clung to her and, laughing or crying, said, "Mommy, my beloved mommy, I knew that you were alive and that you had not abandoned me." Maria cried too, but Steve was relieved to see that they were tears of happiness. She stroked her daughter's head and said, "Of course I didn't leave you, my doll, my favorite bunny." Mary kissed her daughter's face and from time to time, laughing through her tears, looked into her eyes and could not look at her. Elizabeth's hair was wet with her mother's tears. The banker looked at them with all his eyes and thought, "Is it really so?" Banker had laughed at his mother more than once when she had assured him that the plots for TV shows were taken from life. Well, now he was ready to take it back. God, how touching it all looked. By the way, what a story for a TV show. Maria was in such euphoria from the meeting with her daughter that she did not immediately remember about the essentials. For example, the fact that for 6 months she has been in the house of a stranger. Maria remembered that Steve had brought her here from the hospital, but why? The young woman already knew that the purse with her phone and passport were not with her. Perhaps the bag had flown off to the side, or the person who hit her decided to make a profit. Alas, it happens. So there really wasn't much to go on. Besides, Maria had lost her memory and couldn't tell us anything about herself. But maybe this man was still looking for Maria's relatives, and he managed to do it only now? It seems all logical, but something prevented to fully accept this version. All later, smiling through tears, thought the happy woman, "Now the main thing is that my Elizabeth, my sweet girl, is now with me. And what about Mom?" "Elizabeth?" Maria called out to her daughter. Sleepily muttered the little girl, dozing on her mother's lap. "Are you asleep?" Her mother laughed softly, stroking her fragile body. "Aha," happily smiling replied daughter. "I'm not surprised," Steve said. "She is cold, poor thing, and so many impressions in one day. By the way, how did you find each other?" Maria asked. "And where is Mom?" "Elizabeth, where's Grandma?" She, of course, was happy to meet her daughter, but she wanted to dot all the I's. "Mom, Grandma is in the hospital," sleepily replied her daughter. "In the hospital? What about her?" Maria was scared. "Calm down, Mom. Everything is already fine," smiled Elizabeth. "It was all Uncle Steve and Evan. They saved her." "Saved her?" Maria marveled. "Saved her from what?" She knew perfectly well that Evan was the driver of the consort. But what kind of trouble had her mother and daughter gotten into that they had to be rescued? So many questions. Steve shook his head. "Well, we do have a lot to talk about, but why don't we put Elizabeth to bed first? The baby is blowing her nose, by the way." "Yes, of course," nodded the young woman. "I want to sleep with Mommy," said the girl. "Can I?" "Well, of course you can." Steve and Maria replied in unison. "Don't worry, I'm only here for one night, and then you will sleep together again, I understand." Maria blushed, and the banker laughed. "I wonder what you understand," Steve asked. "Well, if you are going to be married, you must sleep together," Elizabeth explained, showing her perplexity. "Well, of course you do. Grown people, and they don't understand such obvious things." "Old times, old mores," said the banker cheerfully. "Maria, I am waiting for you in the parlor." When Maria, having put her daughter to bed, came down to the living room, Steve was savoring his favorite Spanish wine. This divine beverage was brought to him directly from the homeland of flamenco and bullfighting. The wine was tart and moderately sweet, and the banker did not recognize any other. "Will you have a drink?" he offered. "Pour," Maria waved her hand. It's a sin not to drink to such a thing. I think so too. The banker poured wine into glasses and after they took a sip said, You probably think I've kept you here deliberately. And for what purpose? Maria asked with a chuckle. I don't know, Steve said awkwardly. For example, to take advantage of your helpless state. But you didn't, she continued with a smile. I assure you, I think nothing of the sort. Although, of course, there are questions. Well, I'm ready to answer them. Where do we start? Well, preferably first. There's not much to tell, Steve sighed. During a morning walk, I found you on the side of the road, apparently hit by a car, and like a decent man, called an ambulance, and called me your spouse. It was an accident. I didn't have my cell phone with me, so I had to stop at the first car I saw and borrow a cell phone. But you should have seen the way you looked at me, Steve grinned. Like a maniac. Maria laughed, and the banker, who also could not help laughing, summarized. Well, I had to improvise. Said, had a fight with my wife. I went to look for her, and here, well, and in the hospital just repeated. You got into character, Maria giggled. Steve looked at her and noted that he had never seen Maria in such a playful mood. And that was because she was truly happy right now. So maybe now was a good time to confess her feelings. No, Maria, that's not why, Steve replied seriously. If I hadn't said that, they wouldn't have let me come to you. And you and I wouldn't be sitting here right now. And you would never have known that Maria, I love you. Steve, don't say anything. I know it's a surprise to you, but I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes. I realize now that I've loved you from the first moment I met you, and I'll never give you up. So don't expect to get rid of me. I'm willing to wait until I'm old. It's not just that, Maria said with a sigh. Steve, I'm just an ordinary woman, an average single mom from the country. I don't hang out in nightclubs and hookah lounges. I don't drive expensive foreign cars, and I don't get my eyelashes and nails done every 2 weeks. In general, I live the life of an ordinary woman, concerned about how to feed, clothe, and pack a child for school. And that's fine, Steve summed it up. I've already seen these women who love clubs, hookah lounges, and everything that can be built up. All tuning, and there is no beauty. Not on the outside, not on the inside. You're the real deal. I'd forgotten there were girls like you. Maria listened to Steve, and she really wanted to believe that he spoke sincerely. After all, she liked Steve too, but she had been burned too badly. No matter what the neighbors said about her supposedly wild life in the city, there was only one man in Maria's life, Elizabeth's father. A biker with movie star looks, and as it turned out, a rotten soul, and how beautifully it all began. Rides on the highway at cosmic speeds, which took your breath away. A luxurious bouquet of roses in the window of the dormitory with a crane, and not for his birthday, but just like that, without reason, flashy nightclubs, and words. I promise you nothing. As soon as Maria informed him of the pregnancy, more wine. Steve's voice came through the veil. Steve saw how embarrassed and tense Maria was and hurried to diffuse the situation. No thanks, she shook her head and added with a smile. I've had enough. I'm not used to alcohol. That's okay, Steve said cheerfully. I'll teach you bad habits. Steve, what about my mom? Maria remembered and felt ashamed. With excitement, she had forgotten all about her mother. And Steve told her about the meeting with Veronica and Elizabeth. Maria cried. Poor little things. How hard it had been for them all that time. They didn't have a good life selling pickles on the road. It's not safe. There's a lot of idiots out there. Now Steve was ashamed of himself. He had actually deprived a child of a mother and a poor old woman of her daughter's help. The banker imagined what they had endured during those 6 months and hated himself. Idiot, thought Steve. I couldn't think of anything else to do in 6 months except a lousy post. It was my fault, Steve repented. I could have hired a private detective. But to be honest, it only occurred to me this night when you told me your dream. But all I did was put the post on social media. You a soul. Now Maria understood why she wasn't satisfied with the version that Steve had only managed to track down Mom and Elizabeth today. Of course she had. A man of his position could have hired a private detective or used the connections that the banker probably had, although the post was also an option. It just depended on the people. And what? Maria asked. Did anyone respond to the post? No. He waved his hands. Well, except that someone commented, say, recently looked for a similar woman. No one had seen me, Maria shrugged. Here, unlike in our village, no one cares about anyone. That's how things got so quiet. That's probably what Mom was looking for. And she, like you, thought the post was a worthwhile idea. Yeah, Steve chuckled. Well, do you remember what happened to you? Oh, nothing much, really. That day, when Steve celebrated in the restaurant a meeting of classmates in the Center for Psychological Health, where Maria worked, arrived important guests from the regional center. The meeting dragged on, and in addition, she had some paperwork to do. Not only that Maria had to wait for a cab for more than 40 minutes, but it also broke down right in the middle of the highway. What should I do? The young woman asked the cab driver in a low voice. I'll try to fix it. The driver shrugged his shoulders and began to examine his iron horse. It was getting dark outside, and Maria wondered how long they would be here. Ah, we've arrived, the cab driver replied nonchalantly. How do you mean? The passenger was taken aback. And like this, the belt broke. Now I call a tow truck and food. But maybe there is a possibility to replace it with another car. Confused asked Maria. This is on Saturday. The driver grinned crookedly. So you can wait for this other car until morning. Catch a hitchhiker. I can't offer anything else. What the hell? She was indignant. What did I pay money for? Money, grumbled the man. I'll give you your money back. Half. You're halfway there. Maria didn't mind, though in fairness she should have demanded all the money. Was the car's malfunction her problem? And there's no telling how long she'd spend on this highway. God forbid they mistake her for a member of the ancient profession. So the neighbors are judging. The wrecker took away the broken car, and Maria has nothing left but to cuckoo-chat on the highway. And then she heard a characteristic noise from behind, loud music, and rapidly flew up, and silence. Most likely, the driver was drunk, Maria suggested. I was standing on the side of the road, and it seems, the road was not enough. They talked until 2 o'clock in the morning, when Steve realized he had to work tomorrow. Good night, the young woman smiled. I'm going to go enjoy being a mom. Catching up on my reading. You're a lucky man, said the banker, quite like Elizabeth recently. Can't complain. Maria, Steve called out to her as she came up the stairs. Yes, the guest turned around. But you're not saying no to me, are you? Asked Steve. No, replied Maria quietly. I don't say no. The young woman entered the bedroom and smiled happily. Elizabeth was sleeping on the double bed with her dark curls spread on the pillow. The girl smiled in her sleep, and the happy mother looked at her for a long time. And tomorrow I will see my mother, Maria thought. I'll give her a big, big hug. This Steve is like a guardian angel for our family. First, he didn't leave me to die on the side of the road. Then he saved Mom and Elizabeth. Miracles, indeed. With these happy thoughts, Elizabeth fell asleep. For the first time in the last 6 months, she slept so soundly and serenely. Veronica woke up in high spirits. She felt that something good would happen on this day. A young nurse came into the room. Which one of you is Veronica? She asked. I am, said the older woman. There's someone here to see you. The nurse left, and Elizabeth ran into the room. She was followed by the man who had brought her to the hospital. Hello, he smiled. Well, how was your leg? Already better, replied Veronica gratefully. I will refrain from dancing for now, but I'm trying to walk. Well, if you're joking, then all is well. Grandma and we have a surprise, smiled mysteriously Elizabeth. What kind of surprise? The granddaughter went out into the corridor and returned accompanied by Maria. Maria, exclaimed Veronica. Mama. Maria rushed to her mother and sobbed in her voice. But how could it be? Through her tears, her mother asked, What happened to you, Maria? Where have you been? Noticing that they were being watched with interest by 2 neighbors in the ward, Maria said, Oh, you can't tell me at once. It's long, well, and I'd like it without strangers. Can we go out into the corridor? Veronica suggested. Can you do that? Her daughter asked anxiously. Well, somehow. The old woman was anxious to know what had happened to her daughter. Maria and Steve helped Veronica Ivanovna out. They sat down in the chairs, and the trio told her everything. You, Steve, are like a guardian angel. The older woman voiced her daughter's recent thoughts. Maybe, Steve replied. But I'm not an angel. I'm just an ordinary man. But I'd still like to be a close friend to your family. Steve looked meaningfully at Maria, and Veronica understood at once. So we do not need angels, laughed the woman. But I wouldn't mind a good, kind, and reliable husband for my daughter. Mom. What, Mom? Mom will not advise badly. All you have to do is to be happier than I am. Try it. Once you're unlucky, life doesn't end there. So you don't mind. Steve's happy. I've given you my blessing, Veronica said authoritatively. I don't mind either, said Elizabeth. They're conspiring, Maria gasped. We didn't even think about it, said her mother. But of course, the decision is yours. And I'll take it and agree. And you will not regret, quietly said the banker, kissing her on the temple. Steve's parents, his new bride, his future mother-in-law and stepdaughter, Harry's family, and the kindest Betty celebrated New Year's Eve. Oh, girls, I'm so happy for you, she said when she heard about the changes in Veronica's family. And the groom is good, and a wealthy one too. Our local ladies will swallow their tongues with envy. That's right, Veronica agreed. But for me, the main thing is my daughter's happiness. Although, of course, it's nice to rub their noses in it. Well, what am I saying? Maria and Isabella were dressing and decorating the salads. Steve said you were very beautiful, Isabella said and jokingly complained. But it turns out he was lying to us. You're unrealistically beautiful. You say that too, Maria smiled embarrassedly. I'm just ordinary. Well, no, objected her new friend. You are naturally beautiful. Steve chose you for a reason, and he had a choice, you know. Steve always said he wouldn't get married until he met the one he wanted, and now that moment has come. Our Steve is in love like a schoolboy, and you say she's ordinary. Steve, that's great, Harry said admiringly about his friend's future wife about an hour after the chimes and congratulations of the head of state. After my Isabella, of course. For the sake of such beauty, it was worth the wait, although some people have expressed the idea that the bride is as ugly as sin, so you've been hiding her from everyone. Let me guess who expressed such a thought, laughed Steve. Was it the incomparable Jessica? That's her, Harry confirmed. Apparently, she'd been hoping to be Steve's mistress until the last moment. The banker summarized, and the friends laughed. The young banker's parents were also delighted with their future daughter-in-law. She's nice, Louise approved, and she has a cute little girl. I loved her at first sight. But I hope you'll have children together. Of course we will, assured the son. Look me, Victor said, and having calculated something in his mind, jokingly wagged his finger. So that in the coming year we'll have a boy. Time is patient. Yes, Steve saluted cheerfully. Do you like soap operas? Louise asked the future relative sternly. I love it, Veronica confessed. That's our man, approved the in-law. So we'll watch soap operas together. So we will, smiled the mother of the bride, not yet fully believing that her daughter will be fine. She wanted to believe that Steve would not hurt the girl. The man seems not bad, but who knows what will happen next. In March, Steve and Maria got married. To the great disappointment of socialists, the famous banker decided not to make a spectacle of their marriage for the beau monde. Future spouses invited relatives, some of their friends and classmates and colleagues. Both were assured that happiness loves silence, and all the lionesses tigresses let elsewhere walk their hats and dresses. As a wedding gift, the banker presented Maria some papers decorated with a pink ribbon. What is it? She asked, puzzled. And this, my dear, the founding documents for the beauty salon, the owner of which you are now. Me? Maria exclaimed, stunned. What kind of beauty salon owner am I? Well, you're no worse than anyone else, Steve remarked. Take the young wife of the CEO of a new construction company. All she's got is legs from her ears and fake blonde curls, but she runs a boutique. She's as smart as a canary, and yet there she is. That's encouraging. Exactly. He encouraged her. So, Maria, be brave. Everything will work out for you. Well, and then do not forget about my humble person. You know I'll always help. I know, with a happy smile, nodded without 5 minutes, wife. Well, and now my wedding present. I hope you like it. Maria took out an oblong velvet case from her purse and held it out to Steve. And what is this? Better. When Steve opened the case, he raised his eyebrows in bewilderment, but when he realized what it was, he grabbed his fiancée and started circling the room. In the case was a pregnancy test showing 2 stripes. This really is more precious than gold and diamonds combined, the banker whispered, kissing Maria. When he heard a car pull up to the house, he said, "Here comes our limousine. Well, let's go towards happiness." Yes, onward and onward to happiness. Happiness didn't last long. 2 years after the couple had a son, Tom, they moved into a new 2-story mansion with a swimming pool and many buildings from the security room to the movie room. It was an entire residence. Seeing a picture of the house on the internet, Steve was immediately interested and the same day arranged a meeting with a realtor. And when the banker came to see the house, he noted that in reality it is even more beautiful than on the photo. The mansion, located on the other side of the city, was a gift to his beloved wife to the 3rd wedding anniversary. Sometime after the move, Maria again pleased her husband with the news of an addition to the family. The couple had a daughter, Karina. "To even the score is not enough one more guy," said Steve. "Well, what a year." Veronica moved into the old house after much persuasion. "What am I going to do here alone in such a huge house?" the old lady said. "Mom, well, at least in your old age you will live normally," said Maria. "Well, what keeps you in this extinct village? Insane neighbors? And here you'll receive grandchildren, garden and cultivate a vegetable garden. If you want, you can take Aunt Betty with you. After Uncle Tony's funeral, she still can't get over it, and the kids are far away." "That's true," Veronica sighed. "They were so loving. I was always envious of them. Besides, she'd done so much for us once." Betty gladly accepted her friend's invitation, and from then on they lived together. The older women gardened, baked pies, and sold them to the catering companies. "You're good, of course, but why beat your legs when we have Harry?" Steve said one day. "Bake your own pies and donuts, and Harry's driver will take them to the restaurant." The energetic old lady signed a contract with Harry's, and their business took off. A year later, the ladies of venerable age were awarded a diploma for contribution to business development. Banker Steve decided to try himself in a new field and, having sold the bank, created a logistics company from scratch. Maria successfully managed a beauty salon and was thinking about a branch. "And you said, 'I cannot,'" teased her husband. "You are my modesty." Elizabeth enjoyed babysitting Small, as she called Tom and Karina, and still dreamed of a career as a female banker. Steve was flattered. After all, it was his stepdaughter who had made the decision. Steve was sure that this girl would succeed. The 18th birthday of this eldest daughter was celebrated with a big bash. "Our Elizabeth deserves no other," said the stepfather, and the parents began to prepare for the celebration of adulthood. From early morning, the servants worked so hard that a beehive would be jealous. They licked the mansion and grounds, polished the best dishes, took the tables and chairs out into the yard. When balloons and flowers were brought, the servants hustled even more actively. The celebrant went to the beauty parlor. A stunning dress, sewn to order, hung in the closet and waited for its time. Tom and Karina were on vacation, and now the brother and sister were merrily running around the grounds, making a mess and disturbing the servants. This year, Elizabeth had successfully completed her first year at the Institute of Commerce and Law, where her stepfather had studied. She, as Steve once did, never changed her decision. The girl chose the Department of Banking and went to her dream. "I want a red diploma," Elizabeth said decisively after the summer session. "So what's the problem?" encouragingly smiled stepfather. By the way, the girl never considered Steve a stepfather. He became a father to Elizabeth on that memorable day when he picked them up with her grandmother on the highway in a snowstorm. Yes, and Steve called Elizabeth his daughter, that made a lot of noise in the business community. In the internet and yellow publications appeared notes about the illegitimate daughter of the banker Steve. At first, Steve was discouraged, but then he laughed merrily. "Well, so what? It's not like they were lying. Elizabeth really is my daughter, and anyway, I don't care what they write. The gossip columnists want to eat too." The first to arrive were the elderly businesswoman. The ladies arrived in a miniature foreign car, driven by Veronica. "I hope they'll let me spend the night." The old lady asked with feigned strictness and winked at her daughter and son-in-law. In honor of the first granddaughter's coming of age, I intend to drink thoroughly. No problem, smiled son-in-law. There are no problems with sleeping places. Where is the birthday girl? Betty asked. And the birthday girl is preparing to present herself to the guests in all her glory, Maria proudly explained. The Harry family had arrived by cab. Their only offspring, Jacob, was the young man of the birthday girl. Upon learning about it, the parents of the boy and the girl came to the delight. I never dreamed of a better girl for my son, said Isabella. Well, chuckled Harry, what are their years? They're still learning, getting back on their feet. But I'd be delighted if Elizabeth were to become our daughter-in-law. Yes, she said dreamily. It would be great if they went all the way together. Let's hope for the best, the businessman concluded. Jacob was holding a huge bouquet of roses in a branded package. Where's Elizabeth? He asked after the greetings. Patience, only patience, young man, said the prospective mother-in-law cheerfully. Her Highness is preparing for a solemn exit and asks not to be disturbed. The people were pulling up. The courtyard was filling up with relatives, friends, classmates from the new school, and fellow students. And then the music played, and the birthday girl came out of the mansion to the applause of the guests. Elizabeth looked like a picture from a fashion magazine. The golden tight dress emphasized her slender, girlish figure and beautifully shaded her fresh honey-colored skin, dark hair, and eyes. A waterfall of brown hair flowed spectacularly down her back, shimmering in the sunset rays. And a small tiara completed the festive image. Well, just like a princess, clapped her hands Veronica. Queen, objected son-in-law. Jacob came out to meet Elizabeth and, kneeling on one knee, handed her a bouquet, which caused a new explosion of applause. The guests presented Elizabeth with gifts, and then everyone enjoyed the meal. After toasts to the celebrant, parents, and grandparents, the head of the family asked for a moment of attention. And now the highlight of the festive program, solemnly announced Steve. Elizabeth, go to the father. The girl obeyed, and her father took out of his pocket a silk scarf and blindfolded her eyes. What's that for? Elizabeth said with a laugh. It's the right thing to do, Steve answered and led her along. Can I come with you? My mother-in-law asked. Nope, you'll see for yourself. How far are we going? Elizabeth asked. No, we're already there. Watch out for the step. Steve warned and picked Elizabeth up in his arms. When Steve set the girl on the floor and removed her blindfold, she couldn't hold back a gasp of amazement. Father and daughter were in the garage, and right in front of them stood a brand new bright red opal decorated with a giant snow-white bow. Is it for me? Exclaimed the girl in amazement. Well, since I brought you here, it's for you, laughed Steve, satisfied with the effect. Please drive. I'm afraid. Elizabeth protested. How about you? What are you afraid of, you fool? Well, you've been to driving school, haven't you? I did. And if I get behind the wheel now, the triumph will be incomplete. Don't you agree? Anyway, don't argue with your father. Get in. I'm so nervous, my daughter confessed. Don't be afraid, I'm with you. Seeing the culprit behind the wheel of a beautiful car, the guests again began to applaud. Welcome to the ranks of car ladies, shouted Alice, Elizabeth's institute friend. Well done, Elizabeth, Jacob exclaimed. Darling, I'm proud of you. Elizabeth got out of the car, bowed to the guests, and took her seat next to her boyfriend. After they had eaten, the guests wanted to dance and have fun. Steve and Maria stood embraced and looked at the summer starry sky with a smile, decorated with colorful lights. We have raised great kids, right? Steve said quietly, watching the beautiful birthday girl and Tom and Karina dancing dashingly among the young people. I agree, but that's not all, replied his wife cryptically. Well, of course, not all, he agreed. Tom and Karinka are still, in fact, small, and Elizabeth is still learning. That's true, but that's not what I mean. What is it? Steve asked, puzzled. Oh, I don't know how to say it. Well, you better say it somehow, now that you've started. Well, Steve, I'm pregnant, Maria blurted out. Wow, that's a surprise. Aren't you happy? She asked sadly. I realize I'm not young anymore, but it just happened. Young? Steve exclaimed. You'll be young to me when you're 90 years old and shuffling around on a gurney. Brr, what a horrible prospect. Maria shuddered and, unable to bear it, laughed till she cried. And what will you be like then? Also on a gurney, holding his stomach, cheerfully said his husband. Elizabeth and Jacob came up to them. What's the occasion? The daughter asked. My father and I imagined ourselves at 90, Maria said, wiping away her tears. And you, Tom, and Karina will have a brother or sister, Steve added. Elizabeth looked at her mother incredulously. Mom, is it true? It's true, Elizabeth, Maria nodded. That's great, exclaimed the girl, hugging her parents. This is news. I will practice on a brother or sister. Let's go to the table. This calls for a drink. Tom, Karina. Steve looked at the beautiful girl and remembered the little girl begging for help that December day. Everything in this life is connected, he thought. Steve realized he hadn't discovered America, but he knew. It never hurts to make sure of it once again. After all, it means that a person lives. Hi. Someone tapped her just below her back. At that moment, she was standing in the store, picking out groceries. Hi, she turned slightly, not even noticing who was saying hello to her. The young man walked past. Selena continued to pick out her groceries. So if I want to make a pizza, I need to buy more sausage and cheese. She spoke out loud so as not to forget anything. And when all the things she needed were stacked in the basket, she went to the juice shelf. At that moment, she wondered who it was that could behave so impudently. Looked back. There was no one around. She went into another hall. She saw that young man. She noticed him because he was wearing a bright orange jacket, but she didn't recognize him. The interest was already so strong that Selena decided to approach him. He was looking at various cans of beer, apparently wanting to heat up his evening. When the girl got close to him, she couldn't believe her eyes. It was Alexander. Alexander was her neighbor. For a few minutes, Selena just stood there looking at him, a smile on her face. Probably he felt that look, turned around. Alexander, hello, she said cheerfully. I thought we already said hello. He did not understand. Yes, when? She was happy as if she had met a man on a desert island. Like when 2 minutes ago I approached you. He continued to make his choice. Alexander, I didn't recognize you. I thought who could touch me so brazenly, Selena kept saying. And what, you recognize who? He was indifferent. Well, what are you like? You're not happy. How many years we haven't seen you? A lot. She was ready to throw the basket and just disgorge him. Why are you so happy? He was still serious. Oh my gosh. But if you don't want to socialize, I'll go. But know that I was very happy to see you. She wanted to turn around, but he stopped her. Where to? He held her hand. To the checkout, she answered calmly, realizing that time had passed. And now this was not the man she had once known. Wait a minute. What's your offense? He looked at her the way he had once looked at her before. Selena remembered everything. She just couldn't help but smile. This was Alexander, the one she had so much in common with. They went to the register together, paid, and left the store. What are you doing here? He asked her. I live, she answered, not knowing what else to say. You were leaving, he wondered. She had left and come back. Celine didn't know if she was doing the right thing standing there talking to him. Okay, I'm sorry for reacting to your joy like that, but I'm glad to see you too, he told her. And you know what? Let's go visit me. Selena felt herself starting to get flirty with him. And let's go, he said calmly. They walked together to her house. He took the package from her hands. What was going on inside her at that moment cannot be described in words. Some kind of awe, tenderness, and at the same time, everything was seething, incomprehensible. They came to the entrance. She opened the door, went up to the floor, entered the apartment. Oh, what's going on here? He was immediately surprised to see various construction materials in the corridor, broken doors, plastered walls. Don't mind me. I've been working on it for a couple of months. I can't finish it, she said. If you lived with me, it wouldn't be like this, he said, and shook his head. Would it have been done already? She said with a grin. Of course, I'm a man. I have hands and they grow from the right place. Without taking off his shoes, he followed her into the kitchen. Here, only here is a place where you can sit, and here I sleep. She pointed to the bed, which stood in the corner. And when it's over, he asked. I don't know, there's still a lot of small work to do, Selena sighed. because she was really tired of living like this. Like what? He asked. The baseboards need tearing off, she said. I could do it right now, but unfortunately, there were no tools in Selena's house. Alexander promised he would come the next day and do it. That was very nice to hear because it was unknown when the workers would arrive. While he walked around the apartment and looked at everything that was there, Selena put the pizza in the oven as she wanted. There were glasses on the table, and she pulled out the wine. Are you trying to get me drunk on wine? He asked. Why? She looked surprised. No, I have my own. He took a beer out of the bag. Well, as you wish, she shrugged and sat down at the table. And what smells so good? Asked the guest. I put the pizza in the oven. She looked through the glass. You are also a good hostess, he told her. Alexander, enough, let's talk about who, where, what, she told him. As I lived here, so I live and work. What else to say? He looked at her. This look gave Selena goosebumps. What about your wife, your kids? She asked him. You remember Amy? She was divorced. He stopped talking and lowered his eyes. Was it a tough divorce? She asked him. No, he didn't say anything. Did she not let him see the baby? Selena remembered that when they were married, Amy was already pregnant. Don't ask about that, he asked. Okay, the girl thought, it's not that simple. She opened the oven, checking to see if the pizza was burnt. At that moment, Alexander stood up, walked over to her, took her hand. What are you doing? She turned to him, smiling. Yes, Amy and I divorced a long time ago, and as you know, we had a daughter, but she died recently. He held Selena's hands, lowered his head, and did not look at her. Oh, I'm so sorry, said the girl. And why? She looked up at him. Crashed her car. At this point, a stingy male tear rolled down his cheek. Shit, Alexander. She hugged him. How many years have passed? You can imagine that when they first met, they were so few years old, and now they sat down at the table again, not opposite each other, but next to each other. I always remembered you. He put his hand on her knee. And you, she deliberately did not turn to him, so as not to look him in the eye. When I saw you in the store, I wanted to come over. He took his glass. And before, that did not want to approach, laughed the girl. I have not seen you before. He put his head on her shoulder and gently touched her cheek with his lips. Alexander, don't, she pulled away from him. Why? He asked quietly in her ear. I'm afraid of you, she honestly admitted. What are you surprised, Alexander? No, I'm not afraid of you physically, I'm afraid of you morally. You're about to lure me again and then dump me. She knew him very well. Celine, he pulled her against him the way he had done before. She gasped at this tenderness, but she couldn't do anything because there really was some fear inside. You do realize, don't you, that this love of ours will never end? It was once and for life, he whispered in her ear. Alexander, we are adults. We should understand everything. She turned to him. At that moment, he started kissing her, and she couldn't resist. She answered his kiss. I can't live without you, he told her. And I don't believe you, she answered. They were lying in bed together. The pizza was getting cold on the table. Wine and beer were still poured in glasses. They didn't need anything but themselves right now. And you're still the same, he told her. And you're not, she turned away, now lying back and smiling. Have you gotten old? Alexander asked. Yeah, she laughed and turned to him. What was happening between them now could not be described in words. It was already just such a connection, which is inexplicable and intangible. Selena. She woke up to whispers in the morning. Alexander, did you and I fall asleep? She said in a sleepy voice without opening her eyes. I think we were. He kissed her. Today there was no need to go anywhere, so the girl was in no hurry. Why aren't you going home? She asked him. I don't want to, he answered her. Why don't you want to? She was lying there with her eyes closed, pressed against him. I don't want to let you go. He pressed her even tighter against him. Alexander, is it all true? Selena didn't believe it could be. What do you think? He whispered in her ear. I don't know. She really didn't know that. When it was already lunchtime, they had to get up, if only to have coffee. Do you want some? She pointed to the can. Yep, Alexander smiled. 1.5 spoonfuls of coffee and the same amount of sugar. She asked him. Do you remember? He stretched out. Of course, how could I forget she poured the coffee into the mug? The sugar was more difficult because it was refined sugar. She added 1 cube, but with the second she had to labor to somehow saw half off with a knife. What are you doing there? He saw Selena tense up. Half sugar, she laughed and showed him the uneven lump. Well, you're kidding. You could have thrown in 2 or 1 would have sufficed. He got off the bed and walked over to her, hugging her from behind. I want to make you feel good, she said honestly. They heated up last night's pizza and sat down at the table, drinking coffee. Selena went to wash her face. Alexander followed her. Can I have a moment of privacy? She turned to him. No, again he put his arms around her and pulled her against him. I don't want to let you go for a minute. Now she pushed him out the door. After she washed her face, came and sat down next to him, she saw that Alexander was pensive. What are you thinking? She pressed against his cheek. About you. He raised his eyes. And what? She stopped talking. Nothing, he told her, stood up, went to the stove, poured water into his mug again. The kettle was probably already cold. She went there too, to help him. Selena, are you alone? He asked her because he had been thinking about it since yesterday. No, she answered seriously. I knew it. He put the kettle back on the stove. Do you know with whom? Her lips smiled slightly. I don't want to know. Please don't say. Alexander waved his head and went to the table. Fool, of course. I'm now alone, but with you. She kissed him on the cheek. Why are you scaring me so much? He seemed to exhale. Is that what you've been thinking about all morning today? She wanted to hug the man. Maybe, he answered. No, I'm alone, she thought for a moment. But you said you're not now. He put his arms around her, pulled her to him, and started kissing her again. They spent the rest of the day in bed, and when it was already deep into the night, Alexander burrowed into her hair and said he had to leave. Wait at least until morning, she pleaded. I have to go to work in the morning, so I need to sleep and be awake, and I can't do that with you. He got up and started to get dressed. She looked at this man and realized that he was right when he talked about love. Will you come? She asked. What do you think? He stopped, looked at her and froze for a few seconds. I think not. She didn't even think twice when she answered that question. I don't promise that tomorrow or the day after tomorrow because it's a lot of work and I'm busy practically 24 hours a day, but closer to the weekend for sure. He leaned in, kissing her. At that moment, Selena stood up and followed him out into the hallway. I'll be waiting. She ran her hand over his face. I'll be there, he whispered to her. After that, he took his jacket and walked out of the door. The girl went to take a shower. Before, when she saw it in movies or heard someone singing in the shower, she'd always laughed at it. But today, she was singing by herself. She didn't care that the neighbors might hear it and think something of her. That when she went out, she just fell on her bed, lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking and remembering about Alexander, about her beloved. Could it all happen again because they say you can't step in the same river twice, she told herself. She was so happy. She wanted to sing, to smile, to go outside, to give something to someone. She closed her eyes. Selena was just happy in that moment. But when Friday came, Alexander was not there. The girl thought that maybe he meant Saturday when he said he would come closer to the weekend. For some reason, now it occurred to her that they hadn't even exchanged phone numbers, and she could have dialed him now. Maybe it was for the best, she said aloud, waved her hand and stopped waiting for him. After all, it had happened more than once. Selena was in 9th grade at the time. At that time, it was such a happy time. Girls 15 years old, boys, discos, meetings, parties. She didn't think about anything, just lived her happy girl life. What's that rumbling noise? Once asked her mother when she heard that from the stairwell, loud voices and blows. I don't know, replied her daughter. Selena, well, look through the peephole, her mom told her. It looks like someone is moving in. She looked there. That's it. Our quiet life is over. Now the neighbors will come and it will begin, smiled the woman. The apartment next door had been empty for a long time, and since the house was very audible, it was clear that the neighbors would not sit in silence. They would start talking again. Music, it was already checked when the previous tenants lived here. Mom, can I go get some bread? Selena told her. There's bread. She looked at her. Well, for milk or whatever else is necessary, just to the store. I couldn't wait for the girl to leave the apartment and see who will live in the next apartment. I see for money, buy some vegetables and something for yourself. Her mother was not stupid and understood what the girl needed. Selena left the apartment. At that moment, two young guys were dragging a sofa. "Hello, are you guys moving into this apartment?" Selena pointed to the door. "Yep," nodded one of them with his head. They stopped on the steps to take a break. "I see, so we'll be neighbors," she said cheerfully. She couldn't get through because all the space was taken up by the couch. "I'm Alexander, and this is my friend John," said one of the guys. He was smiling. "And I'm Selena," she said. After the young men dragged the couch in, Selena went downstairs. She quickly went to the store. When she returned, she saw that the car wasn't fully unloaded yet and the guys were gone. She purposely slowed her gait to wait for them to come out of the driveway. And there they were. "Wow, how much stuff you have." She pointed at the car. "Yes, there's some." Alexander was still as cheerful as ever. "Well, goodbye," she smiled, waved her hand and went into the entrance. "So, who's coming in?" Her mother met her in the hallway. "Some young guy." Selena shrugged her shoulders as if she didn't care. She went to her room. She couldn't wait to go out tonight and tell her friends. In the kitchen, her mother cooked something, and then she was going to leave. "Where are you going?" the girl asked her. "I'm going to throw out the trash in Leslie," she said about her friend who lived in the next house. "All right, let me go out soon too," her daughter told her. Her mother left and Selena started putting on her makeup and getting ready to meet her friends. She hadn't had a chance to leave yet when her mother came back. "Why are you looking at me like that?" her daughter asked her. "What did you tell me today?" "Some young guy's coming over. He's young to me, but to you he's old." She took off her shoes. "How old is he?" The girl was indignant. "Well, about 10 years older than you for sure." The mother went into the room. Selena at this moment. Selena jumped out of the apartment. When she met with her girlfriend, she spent the whole evening telling her about Alexander, what he was like, that he was going to live near her now. "You should have seen him," she said with a gasp to her friend. "Oh, Selena, enough with your neighbor," Hannah told her, because she was not interested. After that, no matter how many times Selena went to the store, the street, or anywhere else, she never once met Alexander. It wasn't that it was a shame, but she wouldn't have minded seeing him. "Is your mother going to let you go to the disco tonight?" Hannah asked. "Why such questions? Has she ever not let me go?" Selena didn't understand. "Well, no, just the day before yesterday we came late. You said she was swearing," shrugged the girl. "I think it'll be fine." Selena was always cheerful and upbeat. "That's it, then we'll meet there as well." They went home after school. In the evening, as on other weekends, they met, chatted a little, and went to the disco. There they danced, both fast and slow dances. And so, when everyone gathered in the foyer to hang out some more after the disco, a guy approached Hannah. Selena realized that today they would go out not together with her friend, but with three of them, and with her new boyfriend. The girl was a little hurt that she would be alone, but no one was thinking about that right now. When they came out, Hannah gave all her attention to the young man. She was talking to him. They were making out, kissing, laughing, as if Selena wasn't even with them. "Okay, I'm going home," she said. "No offense," Hannah turned to her. No, I'm not." Even though it wasn't true, she couldn't say it any other way. Through the deserted streets, Celine walked alone, and just as she turned into her yard, she saw a familiar figure. It was Alexander, but they weren't so familiar with him that she could so easily approach him, say something. To be honest, she couldn't even say hello to him because she was shy. Alexander at that moment also noticed his neighbor. "Selena," he shouted at her. "Yes," turned the girl, cheeks burning. Inside, everything was shaking. She could not even say a word because she was afraid that her voice would shake. "Are you going home?" he asked her. "Yes," she said again, and thought to herself that she could have said something else. "Do you want to go for a little walk?" Alexander asked. Come on, she couldn't believe this was really happening. She'd been looking for a meeting with him for so long. And now, not only had they met, but he called her for a walk. "Let's go sit on the bench over there." When they reached the park, he showed her. "Let's go." Today, she was willing to do anything just to be near him. Alexander had his guitar with him. He set it next to a bench. They sat down. The guy began to ask what, how, where she studied, how long she had been living in this apartment, some common phrases. "Do you sing?" she asked him off key. Well, as you can see, he looked at the guitar. And now, she looked at him and immediately turned away because she was shy. "Do you want me to sing to you?" he asked her. "If you want." She still didn't look up. Alexander took the guitar. He started to sing some song. And as it happens with all young lovers, all the words in the song Selena transferred to herself. And Alexander tried, pulling something about love, about unhappy love. "Beautiful," Selena said when he finished. "Do you want me to sing more?" he asked her. "I do," she answered honestly, and it was true. The guy started singing a song that said that he had been alone for so long, hadn't met the one and only one he would love yet. And then recently a girl appeared on the horizon. When he looked into her eyes, he realized that she was his in everything. And of course, Selena thought the guy in the song was Alexander and the girl was her. The girl just sat there and smiled. It was fall outside, with yellow leaves on the ground. And now here, late at night, in the park, where there was no one, these leaves, the bench, Alexander with a guitar, everything was so Poltigny. "Why are you so mysterious?" he asked. "No, I'm fine." She got even more embarrassed. Alexander moved closer, put his hand on her waist. At that moment, she turned around and he kissed her. Selena had kissed guys before, but never like he did now. "You're beautiful," he told her. "So are you," she told him, and then thought she must have said something stupid. "Do you want me to sing to you some more?" He realized that the girl was melting from his songs and from everything that was going on. "Aha," she nodded, and he sang again and again about love. "You're mine forever. I'll never leave you." Selena heard the words of the song, and then they were kissing again. "Should we go home?" she asked him when it was very late. The girl realized that her mother would scold her at home. "Let's go," he laughed. "Why are you laughing?" She didn't understand. Now anyone else would have offered to see her off, but realized that we live with you in adjacent apartments. And even if I didn't want to, I'd have to walk you out. He smiled again. "Yeah, funny, but..." She stopped talking. She wanted to say that if her mother saw them together, she probably wouldn't be happy, and then decided not to say it out loud. Alexander must have understood everything, because he didn't ask again. That evening they walked home. He held her hand. Everything was just as Selena had imagined she would someday have with a young man. They reached the driveway. He drew her to him, kissed her once more. "Will we meet up with you again?" he asked her. "Probably, but it still depends on you." She looked up at him. "Okay, I'll say it wrong then," he smiled. "Tomorrow you and I will meet here in the courtyard in the evening." He spoke so convincingly that the girl believed him. Good, and that was all the girl needed for her 15-year-old happiness. She walked into the house, took off her shoes, and her mom came out of the room. "Were you out with the neighbor?" she asked the girl. "Why do you think so?" Did not understand the daughter, how mom guessed. "Well, do I look like a fool? You came in and slammed the door at him," she mouthed. "And why can't we come from somewhere together, walk up the stairs, and go into our own apartment?" Selena didn't understand. "Oh, coincidences like that rarely happen," her mother told her, and went to her room. Selena didn't argue with her, went to her room. She lay down on the couch, hugged her favorite bear, and began to remember how tonight had gone. She realized that her parents would never let her date Alexander while she was in school. She had paid attention to him once when he was moving in, so that's why her mother was thinking about it now. Tonight, she didn't even go to wash her face. She fell asleep like that. She had to go to school in the morning, and she was getting ready in the evening. And even though the girls were calling to go out, Selena didn't go anywhere. She went out to the courtyard and sat at a table. Selena waited for Alexander, for he had told her yesterday that they would meet here in the evening. Time went by very slowly. It was 8:00 p.m., 9:00 p.m., and he was still gone. "Why are you sitting here?" She heard the voice of her mother, who came out of the entrance. "Nothing, just so I can't sit here." She was afraid that her mom would think something wrong. "Well, usually you and the girls go out somewhere, but today you settled right in the yard." Her mother suspected something again. "Hannah told us all to come over tonight, but she's staying late," she lied. "Okay." The mother looked at her one more time and went on her way. Alexander still hadn't come. I see. She got up from the bench and headed for her entrance. She could have gone to where their company was meeting, but for some reason Selena didn't feel like it today, so she just walked home. She hadn't seen or heard from him for 3 days, and then when she got home from school, she saw him at the same table where she had waited for him a few days ago. Selena, hi, he walked up to her. Hi. She didn't want to show him she was offended or anything else she was thinking. I'm sorry I didn't come over then. He took her hand. Yeah, it's okay, she replied simply. Shall we go for a walk? He asked. Right now she realized it's still another day. If you don't want to, we can tonight. He looked into her eyes. No, let's go right now, she agreed, because she thought if he said tonight, then he might not come again. And again they walked. Alexander said something, pressed her to him, kissed her, and Selena just melted from his embrace. Come to me on Friday, he told her. What's going to happen? She wanted to know. My friends and I will get together, sit. I'll introduce them to you, he began to tell her. Meanwhile, the girl was thinking about how she would leave her apartment and go into his. But that was not the most important thing, so she decided to think about it later. What's on your mind? He asked her. No, it was just that. Now she looked at him. For some reason, she felt like telling him about her mom not welcoming their connection at all. But I can see that something is bothering you. He put his arm around her shoulders. You know, the day you moved in, I saw you. I fell in love immediately, Selena began to say, and Alexander laughed. That's your childish maximalism talking in you, he told her. Well, let it be so. So when I saw you, then looked for a long time for meetings. My mother noticed all this, and now, she stopped. And now she's telling you that I'm too old for you and you're still little and you can't come to me, right? He took her face in his hands and kissed her. Yes, she nodded, but we'll figure something out. Alexander was sure of it. Of course, right now it seemed to the girl that she was willing to roll mountains for this man. At school, when she started to tell Hannah about her neighbor, she didn't even want to listen because it seemed that she didn't believe her friend. It turned out that she couldn't consult with her mom. Her friend didn't listen to her. She was on her own. On Friday, when she came from school, she hoped that her mother would not come until the evening, and her father never paid attention to where and when she went. But her mother did not live up to her expectations. Okay, Mom, I'm off, she shouted from the hallway and left the apartment. Selena started downstairs, and with her back, she felt her mother's burning gaze through the peephole. The girl purposely tapped her heels louder so that she could hear that her daughter had definitely left the entrance. Downstairs, the girl slammed the door hard and sat down on the bench. She sat there for about 10 or 15 minutes, then very quietly opened the door, took off her heels, went up to her floor, and scratched at Alexander's door. Ooh, he opened the door. Quiet. She put her finger to her lips. Ah, got it, he said in a whisper. Selena went in and just as quietly closed the door. Alexander led her into the room where her friends were already sitting around the table. He introduced her to everyone, and then they started drinking and eating. The guitar sounded many times that evening. Not only Alexander sang, his friends picked up. It was interesting and fun. Now it was necessary to go home, and so Selena also quietly went out as she came in, went down to the street, after immediately slamming the driveway door and loudly went upstairs. Have you been to the neighbor's house today? Her mother asked her from the doorstep. Mom, are you awake? Was very surprising to the girl because it was not the first time she went out and came back late. But before her mother did not suspect her of anything and certainly never met her in the middle of the night. I'm waiting for you in the corridor, stood the woman with her arms at her sides and looked at her daughter. Well, here I am. Celine stared at her point blank. Give me your hand, her mother said to her. Why? She didn't understand. Her mother took her hand in her own while looking Selena in the eye. Where have you been? She asked her again. Mom, what's wrong? Tell me. The girl was tired of standing there. Your hands are warm, even if you were coming from Hannah or from where you were sitting. It's not the month of May outside. Your hands wouldn't be so warm, the woman told her. What kind of interrogation? What kind of innuendo? Maybe they were in my pockets. Selena didn't know what else to say. She didn't even think her mother would touch her hands or anything like that. Daughter, he's much older than you. If you start dating him, he'll just ruin your life, she told her. Mom, let me handle this. If I start dating him, you'll be the first to know, she told her and went to her room. She'll sort it out herself. Shook her mother's head and went to bed. The next day, when Selena was coming back from school, she saw Leslie on the bench at the entrance. "Hi," she walked up to her. "Hi," Hannah told her. This girl was also a few years older than Selena. She was friends with Tom, who lived in the same house as Selena's grandmother. "What are you doing here?" the girl asked her. "Living," Hannah looked up at her. "I live here too, but I've never seen you here before," Hannah laughed. "We just rented an apartment in this building yesterday. Tom and I are going to live here now," she told her. "Wow, you're welcome to visit," smiled Selena, and thought that nothing would be a problem for their meetings with Alexander now, because she could go to Leslie's and her mom would know it. In the evening, when they met, she told him everything. "So I know Leslie and Tom too," he told her. "So let's go visit them together then," Selena suggested, and they immediately went back to the entryway, up to the floor. Hannah was glad to have guests. Now every night they gathered there, it was fun. They didn't have to go anywhere. The whole group was here. But when her mother found out about hanging out with Leslie, she didn't approve. "Where's Alexander?" Selena came to see Leslie. "I don't know. He hasn't come yet," she said. Selena was offended because he goes somewhere without her. She did not even suspect that the guy could be doing some other personal things of his own. And the one at this time with his friend dipped at the disco girls from the pedagogical school. Naturally, Selena couldn't know about it, and probably Hannah didn't even know about it. And when with Alexander they began to meet after a day after two, then the girl realized that he was still going somewhere. Even though Hannah supported her in everything, it still didn't help. Rightly said then Alexander that it was her maximalist love at 15. When winter was almost over, they sat at Leslie's as before. Alexander came in. "Hello everyone." He walked into the room, saw Selena, smiled, immediately went to her, took her hands. "Where have you been again?" she asked him, although she realized that he had never offered anything, neither to meet nor to be friends, never confessed his feelings, but she still considered him hers. "Where I was, there is no longer," he laughed, stood up, picked up the girl, began to kiss her. "Alexander, you look kind of cheerful today," Selena said. Yes, he kissed her once more. Did something happen? She saw that this joy was all fake. "Selena, I'm sorry," he kissed and kissed her. "What for? Tell me already?" She pushed him away from her. It was the first time she had ever done that. "I'm getting married. I have a wedding in 2 weeks." He said those words and Selena felt like he slapped her. "I don't get it. How are you getting married?" She stood there in a complete stupor. That's when Hannah walked into the room. "I did mishear?" she asked. "No, guys, I don't know how it happened, but Amy's pregnant. I can't leave her now." He didn't look Selena in the eye. "Get off." She took his hands off her, then ran out of the apartment and went to her apartment. "What's wrong with you?" Saw her mother, how she felt when she came home. "Don't talk to me." No one went into her room and closed Celine. The tears flowed by themselves. There was such pain in her soul. She didn't know what to do, what to say, how to act. How could he do this to her? Because she had given herself to him completely, dissolved into him, and he just did not understand. Selena didn't go out all week. She didn't even go down to Leslie's to avoid meeting anyone. After the weekend, the neighbor came to see her on her own. "Come on, we need to talk." She called her over to her place. The girl left the apartment, quietly went down to Leslie's place. They were sitting in the kitchen. "Will you go?" asked Hannah to her. "Where to?" The neighbor didn't even smile. "To the wedding. Where else?" Hannah knew it hurt Selena to hear that, but she could not ask because Alexander had asked her to. "And what am I going to be there as, a bridesmaid?" Selena grinned sadly. "Well, enough already. He's an adult. You're still a schoolgirl. How many you will have like him all? Do not be sad. Let him go. Let him get married and everything will be fine with him. And you too," persuaded her friend. "And you know I'll go," said Selena, because she had nothing to lose. And she would see this bride, who he had traded her for. The girl was not stupid. She really realized that at that age, she could not offer Alexander anything, and he apparently could not wait. That day, when there was a wedding, she tried strong alcohol for the first time, and then she danced, and then with her sister she went out for a walk somewhere. That day was like a blur. It was painful to watch a happy neighbor kissing some other girl. It was a year away from graduation. Alexander and Amy had gone somewhere. They just weren't in the apartment. At first, Selena felt bad. She was bored. She didn't go anywhere. She stopped talking to Leslie. Then Hannah and Tom moved out. The girl finished her studies, got her diploma, and went to another city to enroll. It had been a long time since Alexander had told her he had someone else. By the time she studied at the institute, the pain had somehow dulled. Everything was forgotten. Or maybe she had grown older and looked at many things differently. No one could explain that. "Selena, are you always so sad?" asked her roommate in the dormitory. "No, I'm normal," she answered. "Yes, I see how normal you are. You spend all day in the room. It would be better to study, read something, notes rewrite, but that's just sitting there, doing nothing," said to her Betty. "Why do nothing, I think," answered Selena. "Ha ha, ha. That's an argument. That's the first time I've ever heard that." Her friend laughed at her. "I don't see anything funny," turned away from her neighbor. "Come on, stop being sad and thinking. Let's go for a walk," she called her. "Oh, I'm so reluctant," Selena honestly admitted. "Tell me, when was the last time you went out with guys, dated, went to a disco or something else?" Sat down next to her Betty. When, never. At that moment, she remembered how with Alexander they went out, how he played guitar to her, sang songs. Well, Betty was waiting for her to act. "And you know what? Okay, let's go," Selena agreed with her. "That's another thing. Come on, get up. I'll show you that you can not only think, but also have a good time," immediately revived girlfriend. They went outside, went to the center of the city. It was very beautiful. There were benches. You could sit and meet with friends. "Here they are. Now I'll introduce you," said Betty to Selene. A group of young people approached them, where there were both girls and guys. After introductions, they started talking to Selena as if they had known her forever. And among all of them, the girls singled one out. His name was Michael. He wasn't like the others. If everyone else wanted to drink, go for a walk, go to a disco or something else, this one was kind of pensive. He was always looking somewhere, not sitting with everyone else. But today Selena was too shy to approach him because she didn't know what to talk about and what to do. They returned home with the neighbor. She began to ask how and what, liked, did not like. "Who is this Michael?" Selena did not want to put this conversation in a long box. "Wow, girlfriend," the first time she went out on the street, met the company, and immediately began to build bridges, Betty told her. "Come on, I was just finding out." The girl was immediately embarrassed. "Come on, say everything straight." "I understand," smiled roommate. "What can I say? I just liked the guy and wanted to know something about him," shrugged Selena. "Well, I can't even tell you anything about him. He's always so quiet, though he gathers with us all the time, but he doesn't say much when he's talking. If everyone is dancing, he sits aside. They tell jokes, he laughs, but he never speaks." Began to remember Betty about Michael. "I see." Selena stopped talking. "Why don't you ask him yourself?" said her friend confidently. "Maybe someday I'll get my act together and ask," felt the girl's cheeks flush. The next day, when they came in from their studies, they immediately started packing. Now it was only worth it to look at her roommate as she smiled and nodded at her, showing that she was ready to go again today. "So are you going to talk to him today?" Betty was curious. "I don't know. I guess Selena wasn't a timid person, but after what happened to her in her relationship with Alexander, she had changed a bit." Today, all the guys were at the cafe when everyone was sitting around laughing about something. That's when Selena came up to Michael. "Why aren't you laughing with everyone else?" she asked. "How about you?" He turned to her. "I don't know." She was confused by the question. She was expecting something else. "Well, I'm kind of new in this company. I don't know much yet," she said. "Well, I'm more of a listener than a talker. I'm interested in these guys, interested in watching what they do, how they do it, but I don't really want to take part in it," Michael told her and looked at her with his clear blue eyes. Selena could see that he was waiting for an answer or some other word from her, but she didn't know what to say, what to talk about. She couldn't think of anything to ask either. "How about we get out of here?" Michael suggested himself. "Where should we go?" the girl asked him. "Yes, anywhere," he told her. Of course, I'm new to this city, but I know a place here. I discovered it recently. Come on, I'll show you, she smiled at him. Now Selena felt inside that something was changing in her. She really liked this guy. In all the time she had spent without Alexander, she had never looked at other young men. Let's go, he stood up. BT, we'll go for a walk with Michael. I hope no one will mind. She turned to her girlfriend, but looked at all the guys. Yeah, sure, come on. Her roommate winked at her and smiled. They left the cafe and headed in the direction where the private sector was. I even wonder where you're taking me, Michael said after a long silence. It is certainly not close, but believe me, it is very beautiful there. She said so because she could not explain where she was taking the young man. They had practically reached the exit from the city. There was a big bridge there. Selena asked him to help her, and she started to go down. Michael gave her a hand, helped her, and then went down himself. Now they were under the bridge. There was a ledge to sit on, and as they did so, Selena took the boy by the chin and turned his head to the side. Look, she said. There was a river with a swift current, with large rocks piled along the edges, and a young forest framing the river. Yes, you're right. It's really beautiful here, he told her. Brr, she shivered. Are you cold? He turned to her. Yes, I didn't think it would be chilly here, but apparently from the river, she wrapped her arms around herself. Come here, he moved closer. Celine didn't resist. The young man put his arms around her and pulled his jacket over her back. Thank you, she lifted her head and looked up at him. You smell so good, Michael suddenly told her. What? She laughed. It's true, he answered her. You're really different. No one has ever said such a compliment to me before, she giggled. From there they sat in silence, watching the water flow. When a few hours had passed, the girl stood up. Hello, he came up and said to her. Hello, everything inside her shook again. Her hands trembled, just like her voice. The girl could not pull herself together. How are you? Alexander asked her. You and I haven't seen each other for so many years, and besides the banal how are you, you didn't know what to ask me. She finally managed to answer. Selena, I'm sorry. He looked at her and she could see that his feeling hadn't gone anywhere either. No way. She stepped around him and wanted to walk away, but he wouldn't let her. Wait, let's go somewhere and talk, he suggested to her. Alexander, please don't start. She really didn't want this. No, she really wanted it, but that would mean betraying her, Michael. We'll go. Everything will be fine. I promise you. He pulled her with him. The girl closed her eyes. She knew she was doing the wrong thing, but she couldn't help it. They walked to a small cafe. Alexander was saying something. She was smiling. Selena just sat and looked at the man she cared so much about. Why aren't you saying anything? He asked her. I don't know what to say to you. I realize that you deceived me, betrayed me, but I can't help it. I just want to be near you. Now she wasn't as embarrassed as before. Okay, come here. He held out his hand to her. Selena stood up, walking over to him. He sat her on his lap and started kissing her neck, her hair. She closed her eyes and just gave in to those feelings. Why does it have to be like this every time? She spoke softly. Shall we go to my place? He whispered to her. Do you live there too? She asked him. Yep, he said back to her. What about your wife? This question was not just because she was worried that Amy might see them, but in general, whether she was there now or not. We divorced. He looked into the girl's eyes. Good. She didn't bother asking him why, about what, because she realized that if he wanted to, he would tell her. Now, when they came to the entrance where they both lived, Selena smiled. She took off her shoes, as in childhood, and quietly began to climb the stairs. Alexander carried her bag, followed, and smiled. They entered the apartment, whispered for a long time, then started kissing. When Selena woke up in his bed in the morning, she had no regrets. Are you going to stay? Alexander asked her. No, actually, I didn't want to tell you about it yesterday. I'm getting married. She said those words and smiled. I don't see anything funny, he told her. I just remembered how you once said those words to me just like that, she kissed him. And the fact that you are now cheating on your fiancé, is that normal? Alexander asked her. Yes, I realize that I am doing wrong, but I couldn't stop myself, she said, got up and started to dress. Will I see you again? He sat up in bed. I can't answer that question for you, she told him, took her bag and shoes in her hands, quietly left the apartment. went down to the floor. There she put on her heels and started to climb back up. Selena knocked on the door. Her mother opened it immediately. "Hi," cheered both of them as Selena hugged the woman. The mother only hummed and looked at her. "What?" her daughter asked her. "Nothing, hands are warm." After that they talked a lot and for a long time, and closer to the weekend together went to where Michael and Selena lived. Everything went well. The girl did not even remember about her cheating. Yes, and it was hard to call it cheating. In fact, it was, but not to her liking. She loved this man and wanted to always be with him. And maybe now that her dream had come true, she would forget him forever. But that's just what she thought to herself. 3 years passed. Things were going very well in her and Michael's relationship. Her husband was already working. Now Selena was getting a job too. When she had worked almost a year, she was entitled to a vacation. "Then Oma, I'm going." She looked at her husband. "Yes, of course. Where do you want to go?" He was interested. "First of all, I'll visit my mom, and then we'll see." She almost never hid anything from him. Great. It was warm between them now, as it always was. And so Selena was walking up her entryway again. She glanced at Alexander's door, stepping through her own. Her parents were happy to see her arrive. And when the next day she wanted to meet her friends, she went out into the yard, and again she saw him. And again she couldn't pass by. She stopped. Today, no one asked how and who was doing. They just hugged and started kissing. "So funny," said the girl, when they were already at Alexander's apartment. "What's so funny?" He didn't understand. "I did not know. We meet once every 5 years," she exaggerated. "My beautiful." He removed the bangs from her eyes. "Alexander, don't please," she asked him, knowing that again she would do nothing to make them break up and never meet again. "How are you here now?" "I came on vacation, decided first to see my mother, and then already rushed somewhere further." She was pleased to lie next to him. "And let's go together," suggested to her Alexander. "I don't mind." She turned to him and kissed him. Mom, as usual, didn't know anything. Selena told her she was going alone. She took her suitcase and went to the train station. Alexander was already waiting for her there. They spent the whole vacation together. They both came back, realizing that she was about to go home. "Can't you stay?" he asked her. No, she didn't lie to him because she didn't want to hurt Michael. On the last night, Alexander had kissed her so much that Selena was ready to change her mind. But she mustered up all her willpower and left. She arrived home and Michael greeted her with flowers. He always did that because he was a very attentive and caring husband. She was a little embarrassed in front of him, but she smiled. Life went on. Almost a year passed, and when Selena was once again going on vacation, she decided that if she met Alexander, she would definitely tell everything to Michael, and they would divorce. And so, when the bags were already packed and she was ready to go out, she suddenly felt sick. "What's wrong?" Michael came running up to her. "I don't know, maybe my blood pressure dropped, and I was dizzy and nauseous. Don't you think?" Michael stopped talking and smiled. "You mean the pregnancy?" Selena guessed. Yeah, he nodded affirmatively. But it was easy to check. They'd been waiting for this moment for a long time, and now, when she was about to leave, it had come. When it was confirmed, of course, she decided to stay with her husband, called her mom, told her the good news. After that, it was a hard time. All year long, she was nauseous, her blood pressure was high, her legs were swollen. Selena just couldn't wait until it was time to burst into tears. And then it happened. Their firstborn son was born and they named him Mark. Selena had always felt like a young girl who could do anything, but when the baby came into the world, the time somehow quickly ran away. Here she was sitting with him in the maternity leave, and now it's time for him to go to kindergarten. Now there were already other worries, some crafts, applications, everything else. Michael had been around all this time, but they were like neighbors. "Michael, should we split up like you did?" Selena asked him in the kitchen. "I don't know. If you want to, let's get a divorce." He was apathetic as always. "Why are you like this?" She sat down on the chair next to him. "Like what?" He didn't look at her. "Oh, okay." She got up, went to her room. So life went on, and when Mark was in 4th grade, Selena, after all, made up her mind and filed for divorce. The apartment was Michael's parents', so there was nothing to divide. She packed some things, and together with her son, they went to Selena's hometown. Do not regret that so many years have passed, her mother asked her. What's there to regret? I'm like in a cage. Here is a child with whom I need to constantly study, something to do, on the other hand. Pharmacy husband, who always does not care what I say, he will do. Selena was nervous. Don't be so hard on yourself, her mother told her. Say, Mom, are any of the girls left in town? She asked her. I think Hannah's here. The woman remembered something. Do you think they still have a home phone or not anymore? Smiled Selena. You dial it? Check. She's been living with her grandmother lately. Maybe she still has one. Her mother shrugged. Selena dialed her school friend's home number, and after a couple of beeps she heard her. Hannah, hi, she said cheerfully. Selena, it can't be how many years it's been. Couldn't believe it. They arranged to meet, and that evening they spent a lot of fun. Almost all night Selena told Hannah what they had had over the years. They saw that they had changed a lot. They both had children, a divorce under their belt. Well, you go ahead, don't get lost, Hannah told her. Yeah, now, I guess I won't get lost, as long as I've come here to live here, Celine told her. The time was practically 5 in the morning when she went outside and walked home. And when she walked into the courtyard, she just laughed. There at the table sat none other than Alexander. This just can't be. She walked towards him. Selena, how are you here at this hour? He looked up at her. I left my husband, I came to my mother, and you? Now she was no longer shy, sat down next to him and took his hand. I'm sick of everything at home. I went out for some fresh air. He sighed and smiled, but it turned out to be sad. At 5 in the morning, she shook her head. Aha, you left for me? I had nothing left. Met with one, a little lived together, then decided to get married. And now I still regret that I went to this step, said calmly Alexander. I see, and I wanted to live with my mother. But now I realize that I'll probably rent an apartment, Selena said slowly. They exchanged phone numbers, hugged, entered the entrance together, went upstairs. Bye, he looked into her eyes. Bye, she walked into the house. Inside her, it was like butterflies were fluttering. What's the matter with you? Did you meet the neighbor again? Saw her mother, what a state she was in. That's it, Mom, enough, it's been so long, it's boring. She went into her room where her son was sleeping, lay down next to him. The next day, as she wanted, Selena really rented an apartment and in the evening called Alexandra. If you want to come, I'll give you the address now, she told him. I'm on my way, he answered and hung up. Selena told her mom that she wouldn't take the baby with her because she wanted to do some repairs. She herself just wanted to meet Alexander. He arrived. They briefly sat at the table, drank a little wine, and then they were together again in bed. He hugged her, kissed her, stroked her hair. She touched his stubble, remembering how good they had been together. Funny, she said. Funny to you again. What is it this time? Alexander asked her. How many years you and I have been together? A lot, but really not at all, she replied. No, it's only physically we are not together, but for real? He looked expectantly. Well, 15 years for sure, she counted in her head. Selena raised up on her elbow. Can you imagine? So many years we love each other, and there's no way we can be together. Alexander lay on his back and sighed. Maybe it's not fate. Selena kissed him. I don't know the answer to that question. He squeezed his eyes shut, sighed, hugged her, realizing that in the morning he would still have to go back to his wife. We can't be together now either, can we? She looked at him. You see, Selena, yes, my wife is giving me a hard time, but I can't hurt her. At least not yet. I need time, he told her. Okay, I don't demand anything from you, she smiled. Now that Mark was being sent to his grandmother's house for the weekend, Selena and Alexander were seeing each other again, and there were already conscious meetings between two adults. What have you been doing for a week? Alexander asked her. Nothing, back and forth. Getting a job, she said quickly. Did not meet anyone. Asked another question. Why are you talking like that? Selena didn't understand. You know how jealous I am of you. He kissed her without stopping. Himself, then with his wife, does not want to offend her, but I am jealous, and I do not am, and others will not give. did not understand his girlfriend. All right, calm down, he pulled her to him. When Selena got a job, perhaps it was Alexander's fault, who was always talking about it, or maybe she wanted it herself. But that's where she met Paul. He worked as a security guard, and he was such a simple guy. You could talk to him about anything, and her mom liked him. Mark began to treat him normally. Alexander, I'm getting married, Selena told him once when we met. I don't get it. He looked at her, realizing that she had never once told him about any other men or meeting them. I'm sorry, but if you want, we can keep seeing each other, she said. Alexander quickly got up, got dressed and left without saying a word. Selena realized that she had hurt him, but it wasn't good to live alone either. After the wedding, Paul suggested that Selena go to the north to try to make some money there. She didn't mind because she needed the distraction. Her mom talked her into leaving Mark here, not picking him up from school. That was the deal. Leaving Mark here, not picking him up from school. That was the deal. Strange as it may seem, the young couple settled down quickly after arriving in the north. They found a job, got good money, and somehow Paul began to drift away from his wife. Here he drank once, here is the second, came home drunk, began to complain about how hard his life. When Selena said the same thing, he only nodded his head, not believing her. Family life lasted only 3 years. During that time, Selena only went home once on vacation to see her son. The rest of the time, they'd only talk on the phone. And now she was standing on the doorstep with a bag, looking at Paul, and could not believe that from a handsome, cheerful, cool guy he had turned into a sullen man who was always dissatisfied with something. When she came back to her hometown, she applied to the bank, took a mortgage. The money for the first installment was enough. Now she had her own apartment, where she and Mark moved. Everything was good. Selena began to make repairs. Her mother often came to visit them, then they came to her, and the repairs were progressing. Now as Selena wanted to go on vacation, which happened twice in a year, she took her mother there, and strangely enough, they were very good together. And why did your life turn out this way? The woman asked her. Mom, do not start, did not want to talk about it, daughter. I'm not starting. Everything is still ahead of you. You're only. She didn't have time to finish. Selena interrupted her. Let's not talk about age right now, she asked her. Okay, the woman agreed. Life went on as usual. And then the mother got a trip to a sanatorium for 2. She went to Selena. Oh, no. I'm not going with you. She immediately waved her hands. I see, the woman knew there would be nothing for her to do at the sanatorium. Then I'll take Mark with me. That's fine. Go, you rest there, and I'll rest from you, laughed Selena. Grandmother and grandson packed their bags, they left. Selena had only been home alone for 2 days. She just enjoyed this loneliness because there was someone in her life all the time. And so she decided to go to the store, where the very fateful meeting took place. When Alexander said hello to her, Selena went about her usual business. She went to work, met with friends. On her day off, she decided to go to her mother's apartment to help her with the kitchen renovations while she was away. Hi, she passed by her father's room and immediately began to prepare the room for wallpapering. Are you going to be here alone? The man didn't understand. Why not, she wondered. Okay, the father waved his hand. He was not in the life of this family at all. When everything was finished, Selena went home. It was a day off, 7 o'clock in the evening. She thought it would be good to meet Hannah. The girl took her phone out of her pocket, went into the entryway, but she didn't have time to dial the number. Alexander was sitting on the windowsill in the entryway. What are you doing here? Selena was surprised. I'm waiting for you. He was not embarrassed at all. Ah, she stretched out, passed by, came up, opened the door, and waited for him to come in, so as not to find out all this on the stairwell. Are you offended? He crossed the threshold. No, she replied wryly. I see. Alexander realized that he was guilty before Selena. Will you have tea? The hostess realized that today she would not be able to go anywhere. Yes, he sat down on a chair and looked at her. Well, tell me, why did you come? She turned her back to the stove, doing something there so as not to see Alexander. I couldn't. He didn't explain anything. I see. If now I cannot. She could not help but take offense at him. Honey, I had so much work to do. He approached her, and now he had no doubt that she would not resist. Alexander, she pressed her back to him. I took a few days off. He spoke directly into her ear. So, Selena turned to him. Spend that time together. He turned off the stove and pulled her into the room. Wait, she couldn't keep up with him. And again, the gentle embrace, the hot kisses, everything the girl liked so much. She lay on his arm and thought of different things. What do you think? He was lying on his back. Why do you think I'm thinking about something right now? She smiled at such a tautology. Silence means you're thinking. A man can't do otherwise. He turned a little towards her. What can I think about? Only you. She smiled and kissed his shoulder. And what is there in your thoughts? Alexandra wondered. Nothing. I think that I should have waited so many years to lie with you like this now. She turned on her stomach. Selena, I love you so much. He stroked her. I love you. She was having a ball. They lay there, cuddling. They didn't want to get up at all. They fell asleep. In the morning, the girl woke up first. She wanted to surprise her guest with something. She went to the kitchen, started the dough for pancakes, and began cooking. At the same time, she had a kettle boiling. Selena made fragrant coffee, rolled the pancakes beautifully, arranged everything on a plate. She took a small creamer, filled it with jam, which her mother brewed. Wake up, darling. She brought everything to his bed. Good morning. He opened his eyes. Look what I made for you. She put a plate on the nightstand. What a delicious smell. Alexander stretched. He started to eat his breakfast, at the same moment giving a bite to Selena as well. They were acting like teenagers, though it wasn't like that at all. What are we going to do today? She asked and smiled. Probably for the first time in her life, she was so happy around a man. I don't know, suggested. He looked at her with loving eyes. Let's go to the park where we used to walk, she suggested and asked at the same time. I don't even know. He was somehow embarrassed. Why? She pouted her lips, pretending to be offended. And let's order something and lie around all day. He said his version of leisure time. I have great movies. She wanted to watch them for a long time, but somehow she didn't have time. See, you wanted to go to the park. He hugged her again. They couldn't get enough of each other. They couldn't let each other out of their embrace. So they lay like Alexander suggested. They didn't even make the bed. That's it, enough chilling. Selena said the next morning she had to go to work. Do you mind if I stay here? He asked her. Of course not, she was going to. I'll be there soon. She kissed her lover and left. Everyone who saw the girl now realized that she had something wrong, because she only did not glow with happiness. Are you in love, friend? A co-worker came up to her. You know, I don't want to tell anything yet, somehow later. So as not to jinx it, Selena was afraid that Alexander could leave again and never come back. Okay, I see that you're doing well. I will not interfere, withdrew from her. Somehow the girl finished the day. Home did not go and flew. Now Selena did not care who would think about her, how she behaved. The girl went to the store, bought everything for dinner, went to the house, and another fabulous evening took place. I feel so good with you. The man pressed her against him. Even though Selena realized that she had accepted him once again, and he might think it would always be like this. If he did something or made a mess of things, she would still forgive him and take him back. But she couldn't help it. So many years without a normal relationship had taken its toll. Would you give birth to me? Suddenly asked Alexander. Do not understand? She stopped the course of her thoughts because they were interrupted by his strange question. And what is not clear, he turned to her. What gave birth? I'm not at that age anymore, she giggled. You see, after my daughter died, I want children so much, but I cannot get, Alexander admitted. Of course, I understand everything, but the girl stopped talking. On the one hand, she wanted to please her lover, and on the other hand, she did not know if she needed another child. Okay, let's go. He leaned back on the pillow. I need to think. Selena found something to say. Okay. They turned on the next episode of the movie and began to watch, each thinking about his own. Alexander's weekend ended quickly, and he had to go to work again. And as Selena worked in an ordinary organization, went there in the morning and came in the evening, then Alexander worked for himself, and his working day was not rationed. When should I expect you? She asked. I don't know. I hope to be back by evening, he told her, kissed her, and left. Okay, bye. She was afraid to let him go. But love did not deceive. Now every day, even if not at 5, but by evening still returned. I've made dinner. A happy Selena greeted him. Great. I'm hungry as a wolf, he said, and went to wash his hands. During the time that Mom and Mark were in the sanatorium here, Selena has practically formed a family. I've made up my mind, Selena told Alexander one evening. To do what? He turned to her. To get pregnant. She looked at him and smiled again. Thank you. He kissed her. You what? It still needs to be done. She had so many unspent feelings that Selena was ready to do anything for this man. Yes, I think there will be a problem with that. You'll have to go to the clinic, Alexander told her. What? Why? She didn't understand. It so happens that I have problems, so it is necessary to do everything artificially. He looked her trustingly in the eyes. It's very expensive. Selena knew how much IVF costs. I have a classmate who works there. He will help me do everything, the man assured her. Okay, Selena snickered. She didn't think it would turn out like this. Now we have to go there, go through all the procedures, and then talk about the main thing. He kissed her. After that, Alexander wasn't home for a couple days. He called saying he had work, so he was delayed. Selena had nothing against it. She thought that since they were already talking about such serious topics, he would not deceive her. Hi, sorry it's been so long, he came to her. It's okay, she was thinking about the trip to the clinic. Will you be able to take a vacation at work? Alexander asked her. Yes, of course, she doubted, but there was nothing to worry about yet. That's great. I'll then also tell the employees that I'll be gone for a while. He seemed happy. When everything was decided, they packed up and drove to the neighboring town where the clinic they needed was located. Isn't it dangerous? Selena asked Alexander. I do not know. The doctor will tell everything. He smiled. Let's agree on something with you. She didn't look at him. Okay, about what? Talk. He was ready for all conditions. If at the first time will not work, then we will not try again. She said all this somehow sad. Whatever you say, love. He kissed the top of her head. When they were at the hospital, Selena was taken somewhere, going through all the procedures she was told. Hi, Jacob. Alexander met his friend in the hallway. Hello. They went to his office. Is everything ready? The man looked at him. Yes, the man shook his head. Well, why are you reacting like that? Clapped his comrade on his shoulder. Do you realize what I'm doing? Raised the doctor's eyes at him. Come on, she's young. Everything will be fine, Alexander said cheerfully. That's it. We're waiting for your Selena, said the man, and started studying her papers. It was done. Alexander was staying with Jacob while Selena was at the clinic. She was perfectly healthy. They could proceed with the surgery. Together with Alexander, they signed all the paperwork. It seemed all they had to do now was wait. Alexander, are you sure? His friend asked him. Of course, there was not a single thought in his mind that he doubted anything. Just a few more days then, and everything will be ready, Jacob told him. That's fine. He went to the hospital to support Selena. When everything was done, they drove home together. The girl had gotten all the recommendations from the doctors, so now all they had to do was follow everything. Come on, let's not say anything to anyone yet, Alexander told her quietly and hugged her. Good. She was also afraid that something might not work out. I'll have to leave for work now. The man looked at his companion. Good. Well, I'll go to my mom's. They've been here for a while, said resting. Selena didn't understand how she felt right now. That's fine. See you later. He kissed her, walked her to her mother's house, and then went about his business. Selena walked up the steps. There were so many thoughts in her head that she thought she would go crazy if she thought about it all. In the end, the girl decided not to tell her mom anything for now. How it was going to be would be the way it would be. Hi, she entered the apartment, first hugging her son and then already her mom. Where have you been so long? Looked at her woman. I became ill. I decided to take a long vacation and went to the clinic, a little to tidy up my health. And what are you in pain? The woman got worried. Nothing in particular, but it wouldn't hurt to get better. Selena lied flat out. Don't upset me like that. Her mother hugged her again. They sat and talked. Mark told how he and his grandmother had spent time in the sanatorium. And Selena had one thing on her mind, that now she was expecting a child from Alexander. "Daughter, I can see that something is bothering you." When Mark went into the room, the mother decided to talk to the girl. "Mom, I can't tell you anything yet because I don't know anything myself." Selena looked her in the eyes, so she believed her. And it wasn't untrue. The girl really wasn't sure about Alexander, about his attitude towards her, because he had betrayed her so many times. "Okay, I won't pester you. When you think it's necessary, you'll tell me," kissed her daughter on the cheek. "Thank you." Selena went home because she hoped that Alexander would come to her. And he came, which couldn't help but make her happy. "What's with the mood?" he asked from the threshold. "I don't know, probably hormones." She came over and pressed herself against him. "It's going to be okay," he hugged her, and now Selena felt as if he would never leave her side because of the pregnancy. "I know." They stood like that in the hallway. The next day he went to work. Selena has to work too, but the condition was such that she just couldn't do anything. "Hello," she called her boss. "I'll stay home today. I feel really bad." She understood that she had just finished her vacation, but she couldn't do anything in that condition either. She stayed home. She stayed in bed practically the whole day. At some point, she had to call the doctor to ask why things were like this and what to do. "Selena, is everything all right?" Alexander called her back immediately. "Yes, how did you know?" She was surprised. "You forgot that Jacob is my friend. He was on his way to see her." "Right," she remembered. "I'll be there in a minute." He stopped talking to her. "Okay," the girl said simply already. Alexander arrived. He was so caring, doing everything for his girl. She immediately felt better as she snuggled up to him, fell asleep. From then on, Alexander was home or just around her as often and as long as possible. It was pleasing. One evening they were sitting at home. Selena was stirring sugar in a mug. "Alexander, are we going to live like this?" she asked him without raising her eyes. "Don't you get it?" He got nervous. "What is not clear here? I want to be your wife." She did not hide anything. "Let's wait until the baby is born, and then we will celebrate." He took her hand, pulled her, and pressed her to him. "Okay," she always agreed with him. When a few months passed, Mark noticed that his mother had gotten better. Now it was impossible to hide from anyone that she was expecting a child. "Honey, when did you want to tell me about this?" Her mom came to visit her. Selena became nervous that at any moment Alexander could come, and she did not want her and her mom to meet. "And let's go to your place, we'll talk, or just take a walk." The girl began to dress. Good was not against the mother. They went outside, walked, talked, but Selena never said anything to her mother. "Yes, I'm expecting a baby, but I haven't said anything to anyone yet," the daughter told cryptically. "Well, I don't recognize you lately." She wanted to hug Selena, but she pulled away a little. "What are you doing?" Her mom didn't understand. "I've been sick of the smell of perfume lately," she smiled. "Are you coming home or to our place?" Her mother asked because Mark was at her place. "I'm going home," turned around and walked Selena. "Okay, bye," the woman said in her back, realizing that not everything is easy in her daughter's life. Alexander could show up today and then be gone for 2 days. Some moments Selena just wondered why she had agreed to all of this. She would be alone now. How good it is when you don't think about anything, don't suffer about anyone. But no, she had to meet him again. Pregnancy had taken its toll. All Selena did now was cry and wait. "Where have you been?" She met Alexander once again with a red-eyed girl. "My darling," he began his song. "You know how I'm alone here. I can't tell my mom yet." She was crying again. "That's it. Calm down," he told her. They spent many days together, but except for compliments and hugs, Alexander gave nothing to the girl. Here, everything necessary. He brought her from the pharmacy medicines. "Thank you, but I need you." "Not all this." She showed her purchases. "Understand, I work. We need something to live on." He kissed and hugged her again. Toward nightfall, he left again. What the hell is this? Could not get out of her depression, girl. The next day, she called a friend with whom she worked together. "Hi, can you come over?" she asked her. "Yeah, what's wrong?" She got curious. "Come, I'll tell you everything." Selena finally decided. Her friend was at her place in the evening. They sat in the room. The girl was shocked to see Selena's belly. "So you'll be on maternity leave soon," she said. Yeah, no one at work knows yet. I'm hiding it as best I can, she said. Yes, friend, and I thought you were on a roll, smiled the collie. I do not know why I went to all this, cried Selena, and then told her friend what and how she had happened. What's wrong with you? She couldn't believe her ears. Here, imagine what women are stupid. Selena continued to cry. And who is this Alexander of yours? She asked. Here, the girl showed her a photo in her phone. You what? I know him, made Big Eye's friend. Well, a lot of people know him. Selena calmed down a bit. And I know his wife, the girl said. I don't get it. What wife? He's not married. It was Selena's turn to be surprised. How come? She works in a kindergarten, said the collie. No way, cried the girl even more. At that moment the doors opened. Alexander appeared in the apartment. Hi, Alexander, stood up the guest to leave the apartment. By doing so, she let him know that she knew him. Hello. He turned pale, walked into the room. Stop crying, you could hurt the baby, he told Selena. Why did you do all this? She didn't understand. I love you. He wanted to approach her. Until you get divorced, don't even think about it. She put her hands out in front of her. What are you listening to her? It's not enough what gossip is going around the city. Alexander tried to justify himself. What do you want to tell me that she just deceived me? Why should she? Cried, and could not understand how Alexander could do that to her. She thought that since they had been together since childhood, he loved her with a sincere love. How many times he had asked her to forgive him, and how could she believe it all? And why would she have a baby now if he wasn't around? How to tell her mother about all this? Many thoughts were in the girl's mind. Selena, he approached her. No, I told you. Until you go see your wife, you can't even come near my house, she told him. What am I supposed to tell her? Alexander started talking to her differently. How is that what? Tell her the whole truth, that you have a woman, that she is expecting a child from you, and most importantly, divorce. Through sobs she spoke. Selena. He looked at her and didn't say anything else. What? She wasn't ready to back down anywhere right now. Okay, come on by. I'll be right there. He walked out the apartment door. Selena stood in the hallway, only hearing the door of the entryway slam. She dialed her mom's number. Yes, daughter, why are you so late? She was surprised. Mom? I need to talk to you. Finally got up the courage to tell her mother. Okay, come. She got excited because it was not often that her daughter shared with her. When Selena came and told all this to her mother, she found nothing better than to advise her to get acquainted with Alexander's wife herself. And what? How do you imagine it? I just come to her. So what? Selena was curious and incomprehensible. It had never happened in her life. Well, how is that what? First of all, your stomach goes to your forehead. And secondly, you have been in love and know each other for so long. The mother was in shock at what her daughter is doing. Although not a little girl, there is a head on her shoulders. Why, maybe listen to you and really go? At this point, Selena even smiled because she imagined the eyes of a woman who just like her trusted Alexander. Go and talk. And suddenly he really is nothing, this man, and you cry because of him. You'll have a baby, we'll raise it, we'll grow up. You're not as old as you say. Mom came over and hugged Selena. Thank you for your support, she told her. She hadn't slept half the night tonight because she was thinking about how and what she would say to the one her loved one was living with. At the same moment, she grinned. No matter how many wrongs he had brought her, she still thought about him, even in her head, that he was her favorite. But that wasn't important right now. It was important was different. The next day, from the very morning, Selena did not put off an alarm box, got dressed and went exactly to the kindergarten where Alice's wife Alexander worked. Naturally, neither to him nor to anyone else she said anything. Hello, Selena entered the kindergarten. When asked who she wanted, she said, but we can't call her now. The workday has already started. She's with the children. Some woman spoke to her. Okay, I'll go to the group then. Celine had nothing to lose. The one she was talking to now rushed after her. At the noise, other teachers ran out. Also the music teacher, the speech therapist came too. And when Selena entered the group where Alice works, there were already quite a few adults there. Hello, Alice, a pregnant girl said to her. She unbuttoned her coat on purpose so that her big belly could be seen better. Hello, Selena, she replied, and her colleagues tensed up. And what, you think he'll stay with you? We've been together for so long. I'm expecting a child from him. Soon it will be born. Selena began to tell her directly into her eyes. My dear, you are such a fool, grinned Alice. At this moment, all the colleagues were shocked that the wife did not react in any way to the fact that her husband had a mistress. Why did I become a fool? The girl did not understand anything. She looked at those present with confusion. Don't you know whose child it is? Alice asked a strange question. Of course I know mine, answered her interlocutor. Everyone else stood there silent and just shocked at what they were hearing here now. No, it's my child, mine and Alexandra's. We've been looking for a surrogate mother for a long time, but it's expensive, and no one agreed in our city. And then you came along. Alexander offered me a plan. I didn't refuse. The embryo was being prepared, so they planted it in you. Alice explained to her. What are you talking about? I signed all the documents for IVF. Selena shouted loudly. No, you signed the papers that you agreed to become a surrogate mother. Naturally, we'll pay you the money, but you have to give up the baby. Alice was as calm as a boa constrictor, which made everyone around her terrified. I won't give it to you. It's my baby. Selena screamed at her. They tried to calm her down, but she was already in such a state that she couldn't see anyone or anything. She ran down the stairs and out into the street. She needed to get home right away because anything could happen to her in this state. How could all this have happened? And in fact, if it was true, it could be called betrayal more than betrayal. How could you do this to me? She called Alexandra on the way. Selena, tell me exactly what happened. He heard that she is in a very bad condition. What's going on, and you're asking me that? She shouted all over the street. Naturally, in such a condition did not have to wait for anything good. Selena was put in the hospital. In the evening she became ill. An ambulance was called. She was taken away. Alexander came as soon as he heard. Come here. She looked at him like a wolf at his prey. Beloved, believe me, I do not love her. I have always loved you. Everything she told you is not true. We did honestly, Alexander said and begged her. Man, you're only making things worse. She can't worry, it will be bad, the nurse told him. I will come tomorrow, and before that I will write. He sent the girl an air kiss. She lay on the bed, looking at the ceiling, and did not understand who then in life can be trusted. After this moment, it was not clear what to do at all. Selena decided to tell everything to her mom. Even though she didn't want to at first, she dialed her number, and even though it was very late, the woman came. Wow, her mom listened to her. Can you imagine how this could have happened? Selena cried. And I told you years ago that he would ruin your life, cried the mother along with her daughter. Don't. Now Selena tried to calm her down. At that moment there was a prickling at the bottom of her stomach. Ouch. Grabbed the girl for him. What? Did not understand the woman. I do not know, raised her eyes full of horror at her mother. Then she got up and ran into the corridor, called the doctor. Everyone immediately fussed, ran. The woman was put out into the corridor. Call Alexander. She heard her daughter ask her to do so. Alexander, hello, this is Selena's mom. She dialed his number from her phone. Did something happen? I was at her place a few hours ago. He asked tiredly. Yes, she's in labor. Nothing, the woman softened or hid. On my way, he said and passed out. Things were not easy for Selena. She was screaming loudly. The mother was left in the corridor only to worry. Alexander promised but never arrived. It had been hours, but he still hadn't been there. The mother kept dialing his number again and again, but no one answered. Some more time passed. The girl came out of the room, looked at the woman. Are you the mother? She asked. Yes, she nodded and walked over. You have a girl, 3,952 centimeters. Congratulations, she said, smiling. The granddaughter's new grandmother sat down on the couch that stood there. Thank you, she cried. It's okay, you will soon be able to see mom and baby, the nurse reassured. For some reason, time dragged very slowly, but finally, they are all together in the ward. The baby is lying in a separate crib. How are you? Mom asked her daughter. Everything is fine, and why Alexander is not there? You did not call him. Selena asked first of all. Called, he said he was on his way, but he is still not, said all that was mother. Well, it's in his repertoire, smiled the corners of her lips girl. Why don't you call them yourself? Mom handed her the phone. Come on, she took the device, dialed the number. Hello, she heard a man's voice. Selena pressed hang up. She looked at her mom. What are you doing? She saw confusion or fear in her eyes. It's not Alexander, she said. Who is? No one answered me at all. The woman was surprised. At that moment, the phone rang again. On the screen was Alexander's number. I'm listening, Selena answered. You just called, she heard. Who is this man to you? A new question. He is the father of my child, Selena said calmly. She tried not to be nervous. Together with his wife, they were in an accident. They are being taken to the hospital now. She learned about what happened. What do I have to do? Selena got worried. I just informed you about it. You can take care of it yourself, she beeped. And what? Waited for her mother to know what Selena had learned, because her eyes were getting bigger and bigger during the conversation. And then she started to cry. Alexander is in the hospital, and together with his Alice, cried Selena even harder. At that moment, the baby cried. It needed to be fed. So the woman left the room again. She decided to go to where Alexander had been brought and talk to him. Since she decided, she started to do it. The woman called a cab, reached the hospital. What she learned there made her change her plans a bit. Hello, a husband and wife who had been in an accident were recently admitted here. The visitor spoke quickly. Yes, but I want to upset you. While the ambulance was on its way to the hospital, the woman passed away and the man is in a coma, the doctor told her. I see, thank you. She went home, didn't know whether to tell her daughter or not. She decided that when she was discharged, she would tell her. Every day Grandma and Mark visited Selena. Everything was fine, so they were discharged within a week. Everyone was happy. I'm wondering why Alexander isn't in touch. What's up with them? I need to call, Selena told her mother. Selena, I have something to tell you. Lowered her mother's eyes and spoke out what she had learned that day at the hospital. Mammy, can you stay with Sophia? I need to go to him. She looked at him with a pleading look. But let's hurry up. The child will soon be hungry. She realized that it was useless to do anything. Thank you, my dear, kissed her daughter and ran. She entered his room. He was lying with a broken leg, and something was with his hands. Hello, she said quietly at him and smiled. Hello, he looked only with his eyes. He couldn't even turn his head. You've had a daughter? Congratulations. She leaned over and kissed him. What did you name her? Alexander had already been told what had happened to Alice, and he realized that this was really their child now. Sophia, Celine said proudly. Beautiful. He grinned as best he could. After that, the girl sat down on the edge of the bed next to him. Will you be able to forgive me? He asked for the 100th time in her life. I think so, because you made me happy, and now you gave me a daughter, Selena cried. I'm sorry, a tear rolled down her cheek. He looked at her. I have to go now, but I'll come back tomorrow, she said and kissed him. She didn't know where she got so much love and kindness for this man. At home, she studied with the baby. Mark was also interested. He helped his mother to fill the bathtub with water to bathe Sophia. Afterwards, he rocked his little sister in his arms. Mark, do you remember Alexander? She asked him. Of course, he came to visit you many times, nodded the boy. Would you mind if he came to live with us? Selena wasn't sure about that yet, but for some reason she thought that Alexander would do exactly that. Of course not. If you will be happy with this man, then I'm all for it, especially since he is Sophia's father, hugged the boy to his mother. You are the best son, she kissed him. Now they all went to bed, and in the morning the whole family went to the hospital. Alexander could already get up. On crutches, he waddled down the steps of the hospital. Hello, Selena. Mark and Sophia were waiting for him in the street. Hello. He shook Mark's hand and kissed his girls. After that, they sat on the bench for a while, talking, and then escorted the man back. Now that time has passed, will you agree to be my wife? Alexander asked. Tell me, is it really true that everything was real with me? She asked him. Of course, Alice's eggs somehow didn't fit, but you have to ask the doctor, he answered her, and lowered his head, because he was ashamed. You know, even if it was not so, I still would not give this child to anyone. She hugged Alexander, and the goosebumps ran down her body, so she loved him. I know, my love. He pressed himself against her, and realized that this was the only one who would never deceive and betray.